Hi everyone, my name is Nikhil and today I'm going to present to you my course which is build a full stack AI chatbot with the MERN stack. So we are going to create a full stack AI chatbot which is similar to the ChatGPT where you can ask a question to the AI chatbot and it will come up with an answer. So we are going to create the similar type of clone. It's not exactly the clone, but we are going to create a similar type of functionality with using the OpenAI APIs. And it is a full stack project. So everything is stored inside the database of the users. So even if the user had a chat with the chatbot, so all of the chat history will be stored inside the database and user can view that anytime. And user also have the permissions to delete the chat history as well. And apart from that, we are using the advanced authentication system with the MERN stack as well. So everything is stored inside the browser's cookies, and the cookies are not be able to access by the JavaScript because we are creating the HTTP only cookies. So it is fully authenticated application, and on every chat request, the user needs to send back the same HTTP only cookie to the backend, and the backend will verify the cookie. If the token is valid, then only the chat would be created. So it's a full stack advanced authentication and full stack advanced AI project with a MERN stack. So here, let's start a complete demo of this course. You can see here we have the animated text over there, your own customized chat GPT. And after moving to the homepage, the user have the options for the login and the sign up. So suppose if I'm going to show you the demo of the login, so we can move on to the login and there you can see here are my credentials for that. So we can click on that. I can store my credentials over there. And then here is my password. So let's click on the login. So let's see what happens. So there you can see now I am logged in successfully. So notification has arrived on the top. So I'm logged in. And there you can see after we are logged in, you can see the authentication context is there inside this application. We have the go to chat, we have the logout. And there you can see we have the similar type of UI interface of the ChatGPT. We are using the GPT 3.5 Turbo. And there you can see if we ask any question, suppose how to declare a function inside the JavaScript, and the ChatGPT would come up with an answer. So you can see in JavaScript, you can declare a function using the function keyword. And there we have a code block as well. You can see we are also displaying the code block as well to the user. You can see we have the code blocks, and there you can see we have another question that how to create this server in the Node.js. And there you can see here we have an answer that with the help of HTTP, we can create a server with the Node.js, and we have the description as well. So you can see it is full stack AI chatbot, and there you can see if the user refreshes the page, and there you can see it will automatically be logged in, and all of the chats would be instantly restored because everything is coming from the database. And let's ask a question as well for the demo, that if I ask the question like how to create a component in React. So let's ask this question to the chat GPT. So let's just click on this send. So there you can see now we have a question that how to create a component in the React, and now the AI chatbot will come up with an answer. So here you can see the ChatGPT has come up with an answer. You can see how we can create a component. You can see first we can have this text over there to create a component. You need to either use the class base or the function base. You can see here we have the code snippets as well. You can see this is a completely advanced application and it is very exciting project. You can see you can create your own customized ChatGPT. So I'm super excited to have you inside this course. And there you can see the final thing which I want to show. The user can have the button for the clear conversation as well. And if the user clicks on this button, so all of the conversations of the user would be deleted. So you can see that's a complete demo of this project. And after this demo, now you will be moved on to a different chapter of this course in which we'll be having a deep introduction about this course. So we'll be having the technical introduction that how exactly we'll be building that. So we'll be having the step-by-step process for that. And now I'm going to request you for subscribing to my channel as well. So we create the videos on the MERN stack, on the Next.js, on the full stack development. So please subscribe to my channel so that I can get some help from the YouTube as well for continuously creating these videos. So without wasting much time, let's get started into the course. Hi everyone and welcome. So now you have seen a very basic introduction and a demo of this course. But now let's move on and let's just dive into it and let's just understand that what exactly are we building. Let's just understand all of the approach that we'll be using, understand the terms, their definitions and all. So let's start. So what we are building. So we are building a MERN stack project with OpenAI. So I hope you have heard about the term of the OpenAI. So it is currently most popular thing. So almost all of the AI applications are built on OpenAI. So we'll be building our MERN stack application with the OpenAI, and it's a build your own AI chatbot. So we'll be creating a AI chatbot similar to the ChatGPT with the MERN stack with the OpenAI. So we'll be integrating the OpenAI with the backend of our application, and the frontend will send all of the requests to the backend to get all of the responses. So you can ask any question inside this application. Suppose you ask what is JavaScript, so it will give you the answer. And if you ask any code snippet, then still it will give you the answer. So that's how it's going to work. So we'll be building our own AI chatbot with it. Now let's move on. Let's just understand that what is the MERN stack. So if you are new to the MERN stack, so let's just understand that what it is. So MERN stack is a framework. It's not exactly the framework, but it's a collection of JavaScript technologies that work together to make a full stack web development framework. So it includes the MongoDB, Express.js, React.js, and the Node.js. The MongoDB works for the database operations. The Node and the Express works inside the backend. So we create the API routes. With the backend, we'll be creating the REST API and we'll be integrating the backend with the MongoDB. And then we have the React.js, which is the UI part of this application, where we'll be building the modern and responsive user interface, and we'll be integrating the front end to the backend to make this application. And now let's move on and let's just learn that why do we need the MERN stack? We can do it via the JavaScript and the plain Node.js application as well. But why do we need the MERN stack? So using the MERN stack, it offers you several benefits for web application development. So first, we have the full stack compatibility. So MERN stack covers both front-end and back-end development. So you can write your Node.js application as well and the React.js application as well in different folders. And this can lead to a consistent code base, and it makes it easier to collaborate and switch between multiple different parts of the application. So we have a full stack compatibility with the MERN stack, and we'll be having the modern development. So the modern development, so the React is a modern technology. We have a modern development with the React.js, in which React allows for the creation of dynamic responsive user interfaces, breaking all of the application into several parts inside the components. And we'll be using the Node.js, which is known for the scalability. So you can make any scalable application with the Node.js. And we'll be using the MongoDB database, which is a NoSQL database. So it's completely a modern web development technology. And let's move on. Let's just understand the scalability. So we have discussed that Node.js is known for the scalability. So the React is also known for the scalability. So you can make any dynamic, any static web application with the React.js. You can integrate it with any framework as well. But here we'll be using the Vite with the React.js, and we'll be creating a very dynamic application where everything would be stored inside the database. And this application is fully scalable, that you can create, like you can see the OpenAI chatbot is very dynamic application, is very difficult application to build. So we'll be building it with the React and the Node.js. So the MERN stack passes the term with the scalability. And now let's see that we'll be having the real-time applications. So when we combine all of the technologies, like the backend to the front end, and we have the Node.js, Express, MongoDB, we'll be having the Node and the Express connections to the MongoDB. We can create any type of scalable applications with the MERN stack. You can create real-time chat applications, the web sockets. You can also create the serverless applications. So the MERN stack is compatible with building the real-time apps. And we have a cross-platform support. So MERN stack can be built with the cross-platform as well. So suppose you want to build a mobile application, then again you can use the Node, Express, and the MongoDB. And on the front end, you can use the React Native, you can use any Angular, you can use any Flutter as well for the front end part. So it's fully cross-platform. So one application can run on any device, and it's a open source. So you do not need to pay anything for that. So all of these technologies that we're building are open source. So the MongoDB is a freemium thing, like you can use it for free as well, but there's a limitation for using it for free. The Node.js, the React, and the Express are open source, so you don't have to pay anything with that, and you can just directly access to their source code as well. And if you want to customize that, then you can just make clone of it. You can customize the technology. And now let's move on. Let's just see the introduction about this project again. So again means now we can just again learn that what exactly are we building. So this is a final introduction for us. So we'll be building a modern AI project which will use the OpenAI API to create an AI and real-time chatbot which is similar to the ChatGPT. So again, we'll be building a clone of the ChatGPT, and this application stores the user's chat history in a database to keep track of the conversations the user had with the chatbot. But user have a functionality to delete them anytime. So suppose we want to keep track of all of the records. Like suppose we ask the ChatGPT that what is the JavaScript. ChatGPT answers that like the JavaScript is this, and then suppose we ask that do you know the advantages of it? So now the ChatGPT doesn't know do you know the advantages. It doesn't know that what advantages the user is asking. So we can keep the track of all of the conversation so that the chatbot knows that the user is asking for the JavaScript. So we need to keep track of all of the records of the user, and the UI of this application is capable of showing the code blocks if requested by the user. So suppose we ask the ChatGPT like show an example of use state in React, show an example of Next.js project. So if it includes the code blocks, then we'll be showing the code blocks to the user. So that's how we'll be building this application. So it's a complete introduction to our course. So hey everyone and welcome back. So now we have seen the introduction of this course. So we are building a modern AI project. So we have already discussed about that. Now let's move on and let's just see the steps which are required for building this project. So let's move on. So here we have the guide of how to start. So we'll be having the guide for the backend for now. And in the backend, the first step that we need to follow for building this application is we need to set up a new Node, Express and TypeScript project. So let's jump right into it. So you can open a folder in the VS Code. So you can click on the file, you can move on, you can have the open folder, then you can open any folder. And now let's move on. Let's just create another folder over there. And this can be a name of our application. So we can have the MERN, we can have the AI, we can have the chatbot. So we have the MERN AI chatbot, and inside there, what we can do, so we can move on. So we can just right click on it and then we can move on. We can have open in integrated terminal. So inside this terminal now what we can do. So first we can just make a directory for the backend of this application. So we can have mkdir, we can have the backend. So this will create the backend directly inside the MERN AI chatbot. So you can also create that via the VS Code as well. So you can click on the new folder, you can create the backend. Now you can move on, you can have the CD into the backend. Now what we need to do. So I have a GitHub repository, and from that repository, what we'll do, so we'll clone that repository. So inside this repository, we have the template for our application. So we have the Node, Express, and the TypeScript template. So you can just directly clone, or you can download the repository. Then you can just paste all of the files and folders here. I'll provide the link inside the description of this repository. So you can move on, you can select the starting project branch, then you can click on it. And there you can see there we have the starting project with our application. So we have the readme as well. We have the full starting project. So either you can just download that, or what you can do. So you can just copy that. So you can just copy the HTTPS URL. Then you can move on into your VS Code. And again, you can have the Git, we can have the clone, and there what you can do. So you can paste that URL here, and it is public URL, so you do not need to sign in as well. So you can just hit enter. And before that, you need to install Git in your system as well. So make sure the Git is installed in your system. And there you can see now inside the backend, now what we have. So we have here the folders. You can see first we have the license, then we have the git ignore, and this is coming directly from the main branch. So what we need to do, so we need to switch the branch. So for switching the branch, so we need to switch to the starting project. So for that, what we can do, so we can move on, and we can have, first we can move on to the MERN AI chatbot. So we can have the CD into the MERN AI chatbot. Then we can move on, then we can have the git, we can have the checkout, then we can have the starting test project. So now we'll be moved on to the starting project inside there. And now you can see now we have all of the folders which are there. We have the source folder, we have the index.ts down there, we have the environment there, we have the readme file, we have the package.json, we have the TypeScript configuration as well. So now what we need to do, after we are moved on into there, then we can move on, we can just run npm install. And after we run the npm install, the new node modules will be then installed into your directory so that we can just start building our application. Packages are now installed, and now we can move on into the package.json. You can see here we have the concurrently command. So here we have the concurrently, and the concurrently is used to run multiple commands inside the terminal. So we have the concurrently. First we are running the TypeScript. So first we want to compile the TypeScript in the watch mode. Then we are running the node mod file, and we are running directly the index.js file, which is a compiled version. Then you can see, then we can move on. We have the environment file, and in the environment file, you can see here we have some secrets which are being used inside our application. So first we'll be having the OpenAI secret, and this is a secret key which is provided to you by the OpenAI in which you can use their applications. Then we have the MongoDB URL, and you know about the MongoDB URL that we want to connect our application to the cloud database. So that's why we need the MongoDB URL down there. Then we have the JWT secret. So this is the secret to encrypt our data to the JWT token. Then we have the cookie secret as well, in which we will be having the signed cookies. So we want to re-encrypt the JWT to a signed cookie. So that's why we have the cookie secret over there. And there you can see we have the TypeScript configuration file as well, in which we'll be having the modules ES2022 with the module resolution. So all of the resolution files will be moved to the node next. Then we have the target over there. And there you can see it will include all of the files which are under the source inside any directories, inside any folders, and it will only compile .ts files. And there what we'll do. So the main file that we have is the source/index.ts. And now what we need to do. So you can see we have the out directory file as well. So where the TypeScript will compile all of our files to the JavaScript. So this is a dist file. So we need to create the dist file over there as well. So inside this folder, so we can move on. We can have the MERN AI chatbot, and inside this folder, we can create the dist file as well. So we can have the dist, and after that, it will create all of your output file inside the dist. And after that, we can just open the development server on this Node.js application. So we can have the npm run dev, and there you can see now we have the log statement. This is a starter kit for this amazing project with Indian coders. So you can see now we have successfully set it up. Our first step, which is set up a Node, Express, and TypeScript application. And let's see the second step that we have is now we want to integrate our application with the MongoDB database. So now we want to move on to the MongoDB. Now we want to create a brand new project in the MongoDB. Then we want to integrate this application with it. So let's move on. So you can move on to the mongodb.com, and then you can just click on the sign in, and then we'll be seeing the signing page over there. And there you can see there are two options of the signing in. First you have the Google, you have the GitHub, and you have the email address as well. You want to sign in via email and the password, then you can use the email address. Then let's move on. Let's just sign in with the Google. And you can see this is the home screen of the MongoDB cloud. Then you can move on. You can just click on this folder directory. Then you can just click on the new project. So with this new project button, you will be creating a brand new MongoDB project. So we want to name our project. So we can have the MERN, we can have the AI, we can have the chatbot once again. We have the MERN AI chatbot. We can hit on the next. And there you can see now we have the add members and set permissions. So we can keep it default. We can just click on create project. After it, it will create a brand new MongoDB project for our application. So this only creates a project. And now we want to build a database as well. So we want to create a database deployment. So for that, we want to click on this create button to create a database deployment so that we can just connect our application to the deployed version of the MongoDB. Then you can see there are three options of the M10. We have the serverless, we have the M0 approach. M10 is paid. You need to pay for $0.08 per hour. But there are some advantages as well. You have the storage of 10 GB, you have the 2 GB of RAM, you have the two virtual CPUs. Then in the serverless approach as well, and it is the best approach currently. So you can say you have just $0.10 per 1 million reads. You have the $0.10 per 1 million reads, and you have the storage as well up to 1 TB. You have the RAM auto scale, vCPU auto scale. But you can see there is a free version as well. If we want to explore the MongoDB, we want to learn, we want to see how MongoDB cloud works, so we can use the free version as well. So inside this application, we'll be using the free version. So let's just click on the M0 and let's just click on the create. So it will create a cluster for our application, which is a deployed version of MongoDB. Then you can see now we want a user which is connecting to the database, which can connect to this database. So we can provide the username. I can provide my username. So I can have Anthony. This is Anthony. So this is my username. And there you can see now we can just click on auto generate a secure password. So it will just generate a secure password for us. So we can just click on the copy, and then we can just paste the password somewhere, like inside the environment. We can just paste the password here for now. And now let's move on. So there you can see after we have created a user, then we can just click on create a user. So now our user has been created. And now you can see now we have the IP addresses as well. So from which IP address we want this application, we want this MongoDB project to be connected. So for that, what we can do? So we can just for now finish and close. So we can just click on go to overview as well. And again, we can move on to the network access. And I want this application, this MongoDB application to be connected from anywhere application, from any application, from anywhere. So for that, we can just move on. We can just click on the edit. And after that, we have an option of allow access from anywhere. So with this step, if you hit on that, now you can connect your application with anywhere, with any IP address. And I would not suggest this option for you. So I'm just doing it because now we want to run this project into several screens, into multiple devices to test. So that's why we are using allow access from anywhere. So if your application can only be connected from one IP address, then you can whitelist your entry here and everything should be fine. So now we can just click on the confirm over there. And now let's move on. So here you can see now our IP address has been configured. Now you can see they are deploying our changes as well. Now we can just move on and we can head on to the database. So inside the database, you can see now we have a button of connect. You can see we have the connect button, and from the connect button, you can see inside our environment file, we have already created a MongoDB URL. So there, what we need to do? So we need to provide the URL of the deployed version of the MongoDB there. And you can also install a MongoDB Compass, which is a type of CMS tool that you can use. So you can edit the records directly from your Compass. You can add the record. So you can modify everything with that. So what we'll be doing here, so we need to just click on the connect, and after that you can see there are several options for connecting. But here what we'll be choosing is we need to move on to the drivers, and there you can see we'll be using the Node.js version 5.54 later. Then this is a connection URL for our MongoDB database. So this is a connection URL. So what you need to do, so you can just copy that connection URL. You can click on the copy button. And before moving on to the code again, you can see here we have a node. We have to replace the password. You can see this is the password over there. We need to replace this password with the actual password that we have just copied. So we have copied this password. So we need to use this password over there. Sorry, we need to use this password. So let's move on once again. So we can just copy that here. We can just move on. So we can have the MongoDB URL like this. So here we have the MongoDB URL. And after that, let's move on. Let's just copy that. So we have the password and we can replace this password with our own password like this. So we have the own password. And after that, you can see now we have this password over there. You can just minimize that. And there you can see after this MongoDB.net, we need to provide the database name. So we need to provide the name of our database that we'll be using. So the database name can be, for now, we can have the test DB like that. Test, we can have the DB. So this is our database name and you are free to choose any name for your database. So here we have the test DB. And after that, now what do you want to do? So let's move on. So you can see now we want to integrate the MongoDB database connection. Now we have just created a MongoDB project and now we want to integrate our application to the MongoDB. So for that, we need to move on to the source, and inside there we can create a new folder. That can be, we can have the connection. We can have the connections like that. So we have the connections, and inside there we can create a new file. We can have the MongoDB and have the connection .ts, the MongoDB connection.ts, and inside there we can just export a function. We can export a function down there. So we can export a function which is connect to database, and then we can just use that into our entry file, which is the index.ts. So for that, let's move on. So we can have the export, const, we can have the connect to MongoDB, and that should be equals to a function. And after that, we need to import something from the Mongos. So we can import something. We can just directly move on to the top. We can have the import something that should be equals to from, we can have Mongos. We need to import a function which is a connect, which is used to connect the database. And after that, let's move on. So the connect is a promise. So you can say it's a promise. So we need to await for this task as well. So we can have the async over there. Now we have the async over there. And now let's move on. So after we have the connect here, then we can again use the try catch block over there. We can have the try catch block because it's a database operation and it can fail as well. So here we have the try, and inside the try, what we can do. So first we can have the await, then we can have the connect. So here we have the connect, and there you can see now we want to follow a couple of steps. You can see now the connect requires a URL, and now we want to provide this environment URL, the MongoDB URL, to this connect function. So for that, what you need to do, so you need to move on to the main entry file of your application, which is index.ts, and there you need to run the environment configuration file. So we need to run a configuration in which we can use the environment file over there. So for that, we can just move on. We can just import something that should be equals to, so we can have the .env, and that should be equals to, so we can have the config. So we have the config, which is used to config the environment variables inside our application. Then we can move on. Then we can just run the config over there. So now we have the config. And after that, let's move on. So here we can have the process dot, we can have the environment dot, we can have the environment variable name. So we can have move on. So we can move on. So we can use the MongoDB URL, which is the environment URL name. So we can just copy that, and then we can have the process dot environment process.mongodb URL. The process is and current process of our application. Then we are moving on to the environment. Then we are copying the MongoDB URL from the environment. So that's how it's going to work. After that, let's move on. So if we get any error, then what do we need to do? Then we can just move on. We can have the return new error, or what we can do. So we can first log the error. What's exactly the error? We can log that error. Then we can use the throw. So we can have throw new error, and we can have enable connect to database. So we have the new error down there. So you can see this is the function for connecting our application to the MongoDB database. And then we can move on to the index.ts. And now we want to use this MongoDB connection function inside the index.ts. But before that, you can see now we do not have this server of our application from where we can just connect. So we want to open the application server as well. So you know that we'll be using the Express. So first we'll be importing the Express. We can have the import Express directly from the Express.js. So here we have the Express. And after that, now what we will do, we can have the const, we can have the app that should be equals to the Express. Now we are giving the Express.js reference to the app variable. So now the app holds the full Express.js application. And after that, let's move on. Let's open the development server as well. So we can have the app dot, we can have the listen. So with the listen, we can just open the development server on this application on a specified port. But before that, now what do we need to do? So we can just call the MongoDB connection function. So we can have the connect to MongoDB database. So we can have the connect to MongoDB. And down there, now what we can do? So this a promise. Then we can use the then statement over there. And after only when our application is connected to database, then we can move on. So we can have the app.listen and we can define a port down there. So again, you can define the port inside the environment. So we can have the port that should be equals to, we can have the 5000. So this is our port for our application. Here we have the port, and after that we can again move on. Process dot we can have the environment dot we can have the port. So after our application will be connected to database, then we'll be using the process dot environment dot port and we'll be opening our application server. So inside the second argument, so we have a callback function. After the port is open, so after the development server is open, then we can have the callback function which gets fired once the port is open. So we can have the log statement connected to a database. Then we can move on. Then we can just show an emoji as well. We can have the show emoji like that. You can see server open and connected to a database. And if we get an error, then we can move on. So we can have the catch. We'll be receiving the error down there. Then we can have the console or we can have the error. So that should be equals to this complete error message. So that's how we want to do it. And now let's move on. So there you can see now we do not have any routes for our application, but there you can see we are getting some errors. Let's see what are the errors down there. So we were seeing the error message because we changed something inside the environment variable. So let's move on and let's just reopen the application server. So for that, we can again run npm run dev. So let's just reopen the server and let's see what happens now. If it connects to the database or not, let's see. Fingers are crossed again. So let's see what happens. So there we have the message of the server open and connected to database, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So there you can see now the second step has also been completed. So now you can see our application is ready and our application is already connected to database. And let's move on. Let's just create a first route as well. So let's create a very basic route with the Express.js. So let's move on. So we can have the app dot, we can have the use. So that should be equals to slash. After that, it will work on localhost port of the 5000 slash nothing. And then we have the route callback as well. And the callback has three items. The first, we have the request, which is the actual request object that the front end or anything has requested. Then we have the response. So response is a type of, it's a type in which we send a response to the front end, because if the front end has requested something, then it's our duty to respond something. And then we have a function which is a next. So the next function is used to move on to the next available function, next available middleware. So for that, after that, now what we can do? So we can move on. So we can run a callback down there. So once we receive a request on localhost port of 5000 slash nothing, then what we can do? So we can just move on. So we can have the return, we can have the response. So you can see we have discussed response is used to send the response. Then we can have the send. So we can send something. We can send the string as well. So we can have the hi, I am listening. So we can have the hi, I am listening. So let's see what happens. So if we just move on, if we open the Chrome, We can open any test mode of the Chrome as well. We can open the localhost port of, we can have the 5000 dash, we can have the nothing. So let's see what happens. So you can see server open. So let's just hit that. So you can see now we have a message that I am listening, because you can see now we have made a request on localhost port of 5000 slash nothing. And if I just send a request on something like, we can have the hello. So if we change this to the hello, you can see now it will only open, now it will only listen, and it will only respond with this request on API slash hello. So let's move on. So you can see now we have this message like cannot get, because now we have defined the route as the hello. And if we just move on, if we have slash hello like that, then you can see now we have a message of the hi, I'm listening. So that's how it works inside the Express.js. So this was the very basic application, and there you can see we have the response.send. So you can have the response to write as well. So you can have the write as well, and inside the write you can write something as well. So you can write a message with that. So you can have the chunk as well. So you can directly use the HTML as well inside there. And let's just move on. So what we'll be using inside our application? So we'll be using the JSON. So we need to work with the JSON type of data. So we can have the JSON. So inside the JSON, what we can do? So we can have the message, and then we can send any message like hi, I am listening. So we can send a message like that. So here we have the response.json. So if we again make a request to localhost port of 5000 slash hello, you can see now we have a message. We have hi, I am listening. So we'll be using the message down there. And there you can see we can also send the status as well. So the response. So we can use the status as well before that. So we can have the status, and we can use any HTTP status code number. Suppose that can be 200, which is okay. And we can have the 201, which is created, the 500, which is server error. So these are the status codes that we can use. So this was a very basic Node and Express application. So you can see we just played around with the things like having the request, having the response, and you can see we have the JSON messages as well. And now let's move on. Let's just build our application. So for building this application, we cannot declare all of the routes and their callback functions directly here. So what we can do? So we can create the folder directories. We can just switch our code into multiple folder directories so that we can access from anywhere. And it will make the development easier. So for that, let's move on to the source. Let's just create a new folder. That can be first, we can have the models. What are the database models that we'll be having? So we can have the models here. And then we can move on, we can create another folder. That can be, we can have the routes. So inside this folder, we'll be handling all of the routes. We'll be having all of the routes. We will register all of the routes. Then we can move on, we can create another folder that we can have the handlers. So they are the handler functions which will work on the routes. So we'll be following the MVC approach, the models, views, and the controllers. So the models are the database models. They are the schemas of the collections. Like we can have the user schema, the product schema, and each document inside our application needs to follow the schema pattern. And after that, you can see now we have the routes as well. So we want to register all of the application routes inside the routes folder. And we have the handlers, and the handlers are the functions which will handle something on a specific route. And these are the controller functions which will handle something on a specific route. So we have discussed about the models and the controllers, but the view part is the front end. So for the front end, we need to use the React.js. So for the front end, we'll be using the React, because the model, views, and the controllers, the model and the controllers works on the backend, and the view work on the front end, which is the React, in which something is visible to the user. So that's the pattern that we'll be following. So now let's move on. So here you can see now we have a couple of folders. You can see now the handlers should be there inside the source directory. We have the connections, we have the handlers, we have the models, we have the routes, and then we can have another folder as well. That can be a libraries that we'll be using. So we can have the libs. So inside the libs folder, we'll be creating our own libraries if we have any, because this application is huge, because we have multiple requests, multiple response inside this application, and it's a completely secure application. So we need to create the libs file in which we can generate some of the types as well. We can generate some of the functions that we can use. So it can contain the helper functions as well. So that's why we need to use the libs here. So you can see now after that, the second step has also been completed, which is integrate the MongoDB database connection. And now we have a working Node, Express, and the TypeScript application. And everything seems to be working perfectly fine. And now let's move on. So there you can see the third step that we have is register and log in on OpenAI on the OpenAI portal. Then we need to get the API keys directly from the OpenAI. So for that, we need to again move on to the Chrome. So we can move on to the Chrome. We can just open the OpenAI portal. So here we have the OpenAI portal, and it is a huge platform where all of the AI applications are currently deployed. So you can say it's a huge platform, and this is built by the Microsoft as well. So Microsoft has some share inside the OpenAI. So now let's just move on. Let's just click on login. So now let's just log in. And after logging in, then you can see now you have three things over there. If you want to use the ChatGPT, then you can use that. You want to use the Delhi, which is used to just generate the images from a description. And we have the API. So now we want to move on. We can just click on the API. And there you can see now before that, you need to move on into your account. And if you have logged into the OpenAI for the first time, then you will be getting some credits from the OpenAI so that you can use the OpenAI API's platform. But if you are logged in earlier, like a couple of months ago, then I think the points would have been expired. Then you need to use your credit card. So this is a paid version. If you want to use the OpenAI API, so this is a paid, and there's very nominal charge. So it is very nominal charge. So you want to only pay for what you use. I can show you manage my account as well. So we can add the my account. We can open the billing section. So you can see now we have the usage limit. So I've added the usage limit. You can see of current usage. So you can see my current usage is $0.05 with the hard limit of just $10. We have the soft limit of 5. So you can also adjust your limit as well according to this. So you need to add a payment method, and you can add a debit card or a credit card, and you need to pay them on a monthly basis. So that's how it works. And now you need to move on, and you need to just move on to the API keys to get the API key. So you can say you can just click on create a new secret key. So you can have the name as well for the secret key. So you can define the secret key name, and then you can just copy this secret key down there. So we can add the names, we can add the MERN, we can have the chat bot, we can have the app, we can have the YouTube. So we can have the name of this. So we can just click on create a secret key. So you can see now my secret key has been created, and do not use my secret key because I'll be changing that after this application is over. So we can just copy that, and then we can move on into the environment variable. Then you can see we can just move on. So we can provide the secret down there. So you can see now we have this OpenAI secret with that, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So you can see now the three steps of our application: the register, login on the OpenAI portal, get API keys. Now three steps are completed, but now the remaining three steps are building this application. So now you can see now we have set it up a development environment for our application, and now let's just directly move on to the development. The basic setup of our application has been completed, and now we are connected to database, and it is working perfectly fine. And now we have defined a folder directories as well. And now we want to move on to the development part. So for the development, we are creating a chatbot application. So now we want to store the chats of the user, and for that we need a user model inside the database. So the only model that we require inside this application is of the user model. So let's just see the user model's definitions. So we have a model of the user, and inside that, what do we have? So the first property inside the user model that we have is a name. Every user has a name, and every user will be having an email, and every user will be having a password. So these three fields are required for every single user for even login and the sign up, and for user to be stored inside the database. Then inside the user, we have the chats. So these are the chats that are available by the chatbot to the user. Like what chats the user will be having with the chatbot, all of them will be stored inside the chats array of the user. And this chats array can be deleted as well. So if the user wants to delete the chats, then he or she will be able to do that because we'll be having that functionality inside this application. So this will be the model inside our database, that is a user. And for chats, we won't be requiring a separate schema or a separate collection. So we'll only be requiring a separate type of object type in which we'll be having the chats. And inside each chat object, we'll be having the role of the user. So the role can be the AI chatbot, or it can be the user. And there will be the content, which is a message for either the user has sent that. So the message is exactly the content. So the chat will be having two objects. The first, there will be the role, and there will be the content. So that's it for the models and the schemas with that. And now let's move on. Let's define the models. So for that, inside the models, we need to create a new model. We can create as a user dot, we can have the TS. And for defining the model, you can see what we did inside the connection. So we used a package which is Mongoose. So I haven't explained you that what is the Mongoose. So we can move on to the Chrome, and then we can check like what is a Mongoose. So Mongoose is a ODM, which is a object data modeling. So it is used to work with the MongoDB database for efficient operations with the MongoDB database and with the Node.js. You can see it works with the MongoDB, like it works from the scratch, like starting a validation schema. then creating a business logic, then finally doing all of the operations. Like the CRUD operations can be there, inserting, deleting, updating. So all of these operations can be done with the Mongoose package. You can see the stars on the GitHub. These are around 25,928, around 26,000 are stars on the GitHub, the folks as well. So it's a completely open source. So you do not need to pay any single penny. So Mongoose is very simple to work with the MongoDB database. So you can see for connecting to MongoDB database, we just use the connect function directly from the Mongoose, and then we have the URL. And then for defining a new model, so we define the mongoose.model, that the name of the model. Then we define the schema as well. And for saving a record inside the MongoDB database with the Mongoose, we define a new instance of a model. Like there you can see a new cat. They have defined a cat model. So we create a new instance of a class like we do inside the object-oriented programming. So we create a new instance and then we just run a function which is a save, which is used to save a record inside the database. So that's how the Mongoose works. So you can see we have already installed the Mongoose inside our package. You can inside the package.json, you will find the Mongoose there. So the current version is there, 7.4.2. So now we can just start working with the Mongoose. So let's move on. So we can move on to the user model and there we can define the schema for the Mongoose. So for that, we can have the const, we can have the user schema, and that should be equals to, so we can have a new, we can have the Mongoose dot, we can have the schema. So we can import the schema class from the Mongoose and now we can define the schema. So as we discussed that each user will be having the name. So we can have the name as well. And the name should be of, we can have the type and that should be of the string. So that's how we define a property inside the Mongoose. So we have the object, then we define a property of the type, then we have the string, and then we can add additional properties as well, like the names are required. So we can add the required like this. Required, that should be equals to the true. So it's a required field. So each user should have the name inside the object or it will be denied to be stored inside the database. One more thing which I wanted to show you. So you can see every time we save a file, so it is going to connect to MongoDB database. So what we can do for now, so we can comment this connect to DB function for now. So we can comment that or we can directly move on there and then we can just comment that here. So now you can see now we have this server open and connected to database. And now we can move on. We can again define the user. So we have the name, which is a required property. Then we can move on. So we can have the email of the user. We can have the type. That should be again, it's of type of the string. It's again the required. So we have the required property as well. And then we can add additional check as well, which is a unique. So the name should be the, so the email should be the unique. Then we can have the unique and that should be the true. So this ensures that the email is unique inside each of the Mongoose document or each of the MongoDB document. So this is not a validation. So mark my words that this is not a validation. This is just for aggregations inside the MongoDB. So it just adds the index inside the MongoDB for faster query operations. So now we have the email, then we can have the password as well. Password, and again it is of type. So we can have the type, that should be again, that should be format, and we can move on. We can have the required as well. So have the required property, again that should be true, and then we can define the minimum length for the password as well. So you can do it via the validations as well, but you can define here as well. So we can have the min length and that should be equals to the 6. The password should have the minimum length. And after that, now what do we need to do? Now we have the user schema and now we want to define the chats as well. So for the chats we can define another type. So again, to define another type, so we can again use this schema property. So we can have the const, we can have the chat schema like that, and that should be equals to, again we can have the mongoose.schema. We can have mongoose schema down there, and there now what we can do, so inside there we can define first the ID. So each chat should be having the ID. Then for the ID, now what we can do, so we can move on. So we can again have the type, and that should always again be the string for the type. So we have the type of the string, and then we can move on. We can define the default property. So we do not need to define the ID every time. So what we can do, so we can use a property which is a default. So default ensures that every time a new chat has been created, so once a new chat will be created every time, so it will define a default value to that. And for the default value, what we can do, so we can define a random unique ID to that. So every time we won't need to provide the ID for the chat. So what we will do, so we'll provide a random unique ID. So it would be very simple. We'll be importing something from the crypto module of the Node.js. So crypto is automatically included inside the Node.js. So you do not need to install it separately. So it's a module in which you can provide some of the functions which are just the keys, which can include some keys, some of the networking operations. And there we have a function which is a random UUID, which generates a random unique ID for that. And it uses the UUID package. You can say it uses the version 4 of UUID, which is used to create the unique IDs. So for that, for the default, what we can do, so we can have the random UUID with that. So it will automatically create an ID. Then we can move on. We can have the role as well. Each user will be having the role, and each user will have the role. And for the role, what we will do, so we'll having the type, and that should be equals to, we can have the string. Then we can have the required as well, and that should be equals to the true. Now we have the role, and then we can move on. So we can have the content as well. We can have the content. So again, that should be again of the type, that should be string, and again it's a type of required property. So we can have the required, and that should be equals to the true. Now we have defined the schema for the chats as well, for the user as well. And now we can refer to the schema inside the users to the chats. So we can have the chats like that. So we have the chat over there. So we have the chats, and it is of type of the chat schema array. So we can define the array of types of the chat schema. So that's how we define the array inside the Mongoose. So we provide the property name, and in the array, in the type of the array, we define the schema like this. Now we have the schema of the chats like that. So that's how it's going to work. Now we have defined the schema for that. You can see now we have the schema. And after that, now the final thing that we want to do is now we want to just export this model. Now we want to export this model. So for that, now what we can do? So we can have the export. We can have the default. Again, we can use the Mongoose. So we can have the Mongoose dot, we can have the model. So we have a model inside the Mongoose. Now we can define the name of the model. So the model name is the user. You know that it's a user. And inside the second parameter, we need to define the schema. So the schema should be equals to the user schema. With that step, our model has been created inside the database. You can see the new model user has been created, and the schema for the user is already defined here, which is a user schema. And inside the MongoDB database, a new collection will be added, which is of the users, because inside the MongoDB database, it creates the collection in the name of the in the name of the model, like the model name is user, but it creates in the plural form. So it would be added as a users. So now we have the schema, and you can see now the model has been created. So now we've defined the model inside this application, and everything seems to be working fine. And now we want to move on, and now we want to define all of the request inside this application. We need to define all of the API endpoint for the request. So let's move on. You can see now first we were using the hello. So now we can remove that. And instead, now what we can do? So we can define two middlewares here, two middleware routes, which is first we can have the app.use. So it is used to define a new middleware route handler. So we can have the route name. Like in the first parameter, we need to define the path. So the path can be slash, we can have the user. So for the user operations, we'll be using the path of the user. And for the chats operations, we'll be using the path of the chats. You can see now we have the user and the chats. And inside the user, now we want to define multiple routes. So here we have two endpoints inside this application. The first is a user, then we have the chats. And now we want to define their routes. So you can see first we have a middleware, and now we want to define a router in which it will handle all of the incoming requests made to slash user or anything after that. So for that, we can move on into the routes. So inside the routes, we can define a new file. We can have the user, we can have the router.ts. So we have the user router.ts, and inside the user router, now we want to define all of the incoming routes which can be handled by the user. So what we can do? So first we can define the router, and that should be equals to the router, and it should be directly imported from the express. So here we have the router. After that, we can define all HTTP verbs router over there, which we require. So now we have the router over there, and everything seems to be working fine. And now what we can do over there? So here we have the router, and now we want to add all of the requests that a user router will contain. The user router can contain a get request. We can have the router dot, we can have the get, and inside the get request, the path should be the slash. And this path slash means, you can see we are defining the user. It means slash user slash nothing after that, because this is a base URL for that. Because now we'll be exporting the router, and we'll be using the router here directly inside the app.use slash user. So for that, now what we can do? So we have the router.get, we have the slash, and inside there we want to add the handler function. So for the handler, again, we can move on to the handlers. We can define the user. We can have the handlers .ts, and now inside this file, it will contain all of the handler functions of the user. Like if we make the request to the user slash nothing, it means now we want to get all of the users from the database. So for that, now what we can do, we can have the export, const, we can have the get all users, and that should be equals to an asynchronous arrow function. The first parameter should be the request, and if we need to define the type, it means now we already showed you the type as well. So the type should be equals to the request. We have the request, and it should be imported from the express, and we need to import the request as well, the response as well, and the next function as well. So first we'll be having the request, then we'll be having the response. That should be equals to the response, and the third parameter is the next, which is a function. So we can have the next function like that, and that's how it's going to work. And now inside the get all users, now what do we want to do? So first we need to connect to database, and then we can move on, and then we can find all of the users, then we can return to the response. So it would be very simple. So for that, now what we can do, so we can use the try catch block over there, the try catch, and inside the try, now what we can do, so we can have the const, we can have the users, and that should be equals to, we can have the await. Now we can refer to the user model. You can see we have just created the user model. We can directly refer to the user dot, we can have the find. So inside the find, we get all of the records matching a query. So if we do not provide any query inside the find, it will find all of the records. But if we provide the query, then it will find all of the records matching that query. So here, if we want to get all of the users, then we won't be requiring to provide any query. So we can just use user.find. And after that, it will contain all of the users from the database. And after that, now what we can do, so we can just move on. We can have the return, we can have the response, dot, we can have the status, that should be 200. Then we can have the JSON as well. And inside the JSON, we can send all of the users directly, which we are getting. So we are getting the users, then we can just send all of the users down to. And if we get any error, now what we can do, so we can move on, we can just log that error first to keep the track of the error, that what's the error. Then we can again send the response as well. Response dot status, that should be 500, because now we want to inform the user that something is went wrong inside the database. Then we can send the JSON as well. So we can have the message, that should be equals to, we can have the error dot, we can have the message like that, because there's a message property inside the error. So that's how it's going to work. And now let's move on to the user router once again. So we have the user router, and inside the router.get slash nothing. So we want the handler function, which is a get all users. So this is a middleware function which will handle the incoming request on the user slash nothing. And after that, we can define as many functions like sign up, login, requiring the tokens as well. So we can do it later. And now after that, now what do we want to do? So now we want to export the router as well. So we can have the export default, that should be equals to the router. And I think we can change the name to the router, the user router, from the router to the user router, because it can conflict the name with the express router. So now we have the export default, which is the user router, and this user router will be added there as a middleware inside this app.use middleware request. So we can have the slash user, and after that, the user router will handle all of the incoming requests made to slash user. So you can see now it seems to be working fine. Now we have the slash user. And now inside the chats as well, so we can define the chats part later. So as of now, we can comment that. So you can see now we have the app.use slash user, and inside there we have the user router, and inside the user router, we are just having the slash, nothing after that. Then we have the handler function, which is get all users, which will get all of the users directly from the database. That's how it works. And now let's move on and let's just send the request. So we can first move on into the connection, and then what we can do, so we can uncomment this code, because now we want to connect to database, and now the database connection is successful and everything seems to be working fine. And now what do we want to do as the next step? As the next step, we want to move on, and then we want to test this new endpoint that we have just created. So we have created this new endpoint slash user slash the user router, and now we want to just test this endpoint. So how can we do that? So now for testing this API, we have a tool which is a Postman. So the Postman is used for the API testing. So you can test any type of REST API, GraphQL API with the Postman. So let's just install the Postman as well. So you can move on to the Chrome once again. You can just search for the Postman to install the Postman. So you can see it's an API platform, and you can download the free version of the Postman. So you can download according to your OS. Suppose that's a Windows, Mac, or the Linux, so you can download according to your OS. And now I've already installed the Postman. I'll now open it. So here we have the Postman inside this. So we have the Postman. Here we have the Postman inside there. And now what do we want to do here? So first we need to define the URL of the request. So what would be the URL of the request? URL is very simple. So our application is running on the port of the 5000. So we can have port of 5000, the localhost 5000 slash we can have the user slash nothing after that. So we can move on. TP host port of the 5000 slash user slash nothing after that. And this is a get request, so we don't need to change that. So let's just click on the send and let's just see what happens. So now we are getting the blank response, which is a blank array, because now we don't have any users inside the database. So that's why we are receiving the blank array. But there you can see the status is 200. It means the user is being connected to database and we are retrieving directly the records directly from the database. And now let's just define the sign up request for the user. So for the sign up request, we want to send some data as well via the front end, via the Postman as well. So the request should be the post for the sign up, because now we want to send some data. We want to post some data. And then inside the body of the request, we need to send some JSON as well. It should be the raw JSON. So in the JSON, we need to send the name, email, and the password, because the name, email, and the password are required thing inside this sign up for creating a brand new user. So for that, let's just start on the sign up. So here we have the user router, and here we can define another request. So we can have the user router that should be equals to the post, and now this is the post request. And now inside this request, now what do we want to do? We can just define the sign up like that. So we can have the user router post, and it should be the sign up. And after that, we need to define the sign up function as well. So we can move on. We can move on to the get all users file, and here we can just copy that and we can just paste that over there. And now it should be equals to, we can have this sign up like that. So here we have this sign up. And after that, now what do we want to do? So here inside this, you can see now we want to get some data as well by the front end. So from that, how can we get some data? So we can just get the data directly from the request.body as we just discussed. Get the const, we can have something, so we can destructure all of the data directly from the request. Or we can have the body. From the request.body, we'll be getting the name, we'll be getting the email, we'll be getting the password as well. The name, email, and the password of the user for creating a brand new user. And after that, now what we'll be having. So after that, now what we can do? So we can just create a brand new user. So for that, now what we can do? So we can have the const, we can have the user that should be equals to a new instance of user object. It should be the new instance of the user. And now we can remove this as well. So we can remove that. And now we want to create a new instance of the user, and it will include the object in which we want to provide the name of the user, in which we want to provide the email of the user, and we want to provide the password of the user. So these three are the required fields that we want to provide. And after that, now what we can do? So after we'll create the brand new user, then we can move on. And then what we can do? We can just have the await, and that should be equals to the user model dot we can have the save to save this record inside the user's collection. That's how it's going to work. After the user is being saved, then we can just directly move on to the return. We can have the response, we can have the status, and that should be, and then we can just share the brand new user as well. So the whole new user will be saved directly down to. But there you can see one more thing which I want to show you. You can see the user can send the password. Like suppose the user sends the password like 1256. So now we don't want to store the actual string that we directly receive from the user. So before we store the user inside the database, so we can encrypt the password of the user. So suppose there's a person working in the database team, so they can access your passwords. So that can be a big threat. So the passwords should always be the encrypted string, so the normal users cannot read them. So it should be encrypted string. So for that, now what we can do? So we have already created a package inside the package.json, which is a bcrypt. So the bcrypt is used for encryption of the password. So it is used to encrypt any string. It can be any string, and it can generate multiple rounds of encryption. And as many rounds as you provide, the more encrypted string that you get. So for that, now what we can do? So we can just first import the bcrypt directly from the bcrypt as well, directly from the bcrypt. And after that, now what we can do? So we can move on. So instead of just directly storing the same password receiving from the user, let's just create another password. So const password, and that should be equals to, we can have the bcrypt dot, we can have the hash. So we can use the hash, which is used to hash the password, and we want to provide the data inside the hash. So the data should be the password which we are receiving directly from the front end, the password. And then we can move on, we can provide the number of rounds. So default is the 10 rounds, so we can provide the 10 rounds, so we can keep it default. So you can provide 20 rounds as well. So as many rounds you provide, the more encrypted string that you get. And then what we can do, so bcrypt.hash is a promise. First, we can await for this task. So we can await, and in place of the password, we can just use the hashed password directly down to. So that would be the hashed password. So it will create a brand new user inside the database, and everything should work perfectly fine. So that's it for the sign up request. So everything seems to be working perfectly fine. And there you can see we want to add another validation check. So the validation check can be, we can just move on and we can just provide the validation check of the email. Like if the email was already there inside the user's collection, then we don't want to store a brand new user. So for that, we can again move on. So before encrypting a new password, so this validation check ensures that the user's email was unique and the user was not already presented there inside the database. So we can just check, like if we find the existing user there, then we can just move on. We can just return response status. So that should be equals to number one. You can have the validation check, like the user has already registered, and you can see everything seems to be working fine. So now we have created the sign up function and it is working perfectly fine. But you can see now we haven't tested that, because now we want to add the validation check before we test this sign up. So validation can be, suppose the front end sends you the incorrect name, suppose the name is empty, or suppose the front end sends you the incorrect email, that it cannot be an email, that it was an incorrect email, the email was not formatted, or if the front end sends you the password which is not with the actual length of the password, like we have defined the minimum length. So what you need to do, so you need to add the validation checks before working directly with the database. So before just interrupting the database, you can just check the validations directly before starting the database operations. So for that, there are two options for doing that. The first option is very simple and very easy. So what you can do, so once you move on to the sign up function, so once the user requests for the sign up, now after extracting these three fields from the front end request.body, you can just check, like if there was no name or if there was no email, so you can just check all of the validation checks directly in the sign up function. So it was a first option. And now let's see the second option with the concept of the multiple middlewares. So what are the middlewares? So let's see the topic, that what is a middleware. So middleware is a function. So you can imagine it as a function. So these are the functions which get executed before a request is processed. And inside the Node and the Express.js, the middlewares can be used to check the JSON body validations. You can see this is a requirement, the JSON body validations. It can be used to check the tokens or cookies before the main request. Like our main request is sign up, so it can check the tokens or cookies before the main request, and it can add you params validations, and there are more validations that you can use. So if I want to show you the example of the middleware, we can move on to the paint. So let's just define. So suppose this is a user, or it can be a front end as well. You can imagine it as a postman. So if the postman wants to access something, so postman wants to access something. For our scenario, the user sign up. So if we send some data, but the name is empty and the email is empty, so we can just move on. So currently we are moving on directly to the sign up function. So currently we are moving to the sign up, but the actual concept should be, before directly moving on to the sign up, we can add another middleware function, another handler function, which will handle the data validation checks. Like if the email was empty or not, if the user was empty or not, or if the details are incorrect or not. So we can just check all of the validations from middleware functions. So we can add as many middlewares as we want inside the handlers. You can see, if we just move on, if we add the comma, you can see you can add as many middleware functions as you want. It can accept an array of middleware functions. They can accept multiple middlewares. So you can add all of the middlewares, and you need to note one thing, that the middleware runs one by one. So if one middleware in between, like if one middleware in between sends you the incorrect request, like if the user sends the incorrect request and the one middleware was failed, then it will not be moved on to next middleware. So that's how it works inside the Express.js. And we also know that the next function is there. Like if we move on to the user handler, you can see this is the function for moving to the next middleware. the next function. So that's how it works. So now we'll be using this concept here as well. And for using this concept, what we need to do, so we can just move on to the Chrome, and from there we can just use a package which is Express Validator. So we have the Express Validator.github.io, which is the official website. So we can just use the Express Validator, which provides you an array of middleware functions that you can use, and it is very handy and it is very simple to use. So we have already installed that and it is very simple to use. And inside this, we'll be having the validation chains. So we'll be having some validation chains, like suppose the user wants to access the newsletter. And you can see the email field is required inside the request.body. So it will check with the middleware, like the body contains the email. And suppose it can be optional as well. Suppose it should be required is email as well. It means that if that's an email or not. So you can check as many middlewares as you want with the Express Validator. So now what do we want to do? So it would be very simple. So inside the libs, now what do we want to do? So we can just move on. We can just provide a new file. We can have the data. We can have validators.ts. And now inside this file, now we want to define all of the validator functions which are required. So now we want to define the validator function for suppose for the sign up. So we can have the const. We can have the user sign up validator. So that should be equals to an array. So it should be an array of validation functions. So inside this, we want to extract the body. So this package is already listed inside the package.json. If you have followed my tutorial, then you will get it directly. Then you will get the body directly. If you are not following me, then you can just install the Express Validator. So inside the body, now what do we want? So we want the name to be there. So we want the name inside this, inside the body. And we can add the validation functions, like the name is not empty. We can have the not empty like that. So we have the not empty. So the name is not empty. And after that, you can add another element inside the array. Like you can have the body again. So inside the body, we can have the email. Inside the body like that. The body.email, we can have the not empty once again. So we can have the not empty. And then we can add another validation check like is email. So if that's an email, so we can add this validation check. And then again, we can have the body, we can have the password like that. So we can have the password, and then we can move on. We can have the not empty once again. So we can have the not empty, or what we can do, so we can add another validation check, which is length. So we can have the length as well. Length. So we can provide the length as well. So we can provide the is length. So it will just identify with the length. And inside the is length, we want to provide the options like the minimum and maximum. So minimum length that we have inside our schemas are the 6, and the maximum we can go maximum till 25. So you can see now we have the user sign up validator. So this is the validator functions for us. And now we want to define one single function which will validate all of the validations. So for validate the validators, so we want to define the validate function. So we can again have the export, we can have the call, we can have the validate like that. Validate, and that should be equals to function which will get the validations chains, which will get the functions of the validations, and it can be an array. It can be an array of type of the any as of now. So we can have the array. So inside this, now what we will do, so we will run here a loop, and inside the loop we will let all of the validation checks, and if any validation fails, then we will just send the response that the validation failed and the request will not be moved forward. So what we can do, so we can just move on. So we can just return asynchronous function, because now this is a middleware. So each middleware should return the asynchronous function of the request, response, and the next. So we can have the return async, that should be a function. It should be the request, and the type should be the request directly from the express. We'll be having the response as well. So it should be the response directly from the express. We're having the next as well. Next, that is of the next function. After that, we have this function over there. That's an arrow function. And inside there, we can just run a loop of the validations. For we can have the let validation. We can have the off, we can have the validations. So we can have the let validation of validations. Then what we can do, so we can have the const, we can have the result. So we can get the result of the validation with, we can have the await. That should be equals to, so we can have the validation. We can just move on. So validation dot, we can have the run. So we have a function of the run, which is provided to you directly from the Express Validator. We can have the validation dot run, and that should be equals to this request. That's how it works. So for each validation function, we'll be having the result that should be equals to validation.run, which is request. We can check another thing, like we can check if the result, we can check if the result dot errors dot we can have the length. If the result dot errors dot length is greater than 0, like if we have any error, so inside the errors we can get all of the errors. So if the length is greater than 0, then we can just break this loop, because now we know that now something has been wrong and now we want to just reject all of these middlewares, and that's how it's going to work. And after this for loop, now what we can do, so we can just find all of the errors. If we get the errors, that should be equals to, so now we can just import something from the express validator, which is the validation result, and then we can just check like validation result. We can just call this function validation result, and it checks all of the validations from the request. So here we have the request, so it checks all of the validations from the request directly. And then we can just check like the if the errors are empty. If the errors are empty, like if there are no errors, then only we want to move on. Then we can just move on, and then we can just return, and that should be equals to the next. So then only we want to move on to the next middleware. But if we got some error, then what we can do, so we won't be just moving on to the next middleware. Instead, we'll be directly sending the response to the front end. We can have the return, we can have the response dot, we can have status, and that should be equals to, we can have the 500 or we can have the 422, which is incorrect data. Then we can send the JSON as well. So we can send the JSON. So directly we can just send the JSON directly. Should be .json. Inside there we can set the errors, and that should be equals to, we can have the errors dot array. It will just find all of the errors inside the array and it will send directly to the front end. So that's how it's going to work. So this was a complex thing, I know, because you can see you are creating a modern application and the modern applications requires a perfect data validation steps. So this was a very simple. If you just read the code, you have the user sign up validator. You are just validating the name, email, and the password. And inside the validate function, you are just running a loop for that validation of validations. You are just having the result of the validation. And finally, if you get any error, then you are breaking the loop. And then you are checking the all of the errors. Like if you get any errors from the validation result, this is provided to you by the express validator. And if the errors are empty, like if there are no errors, then only we are moving on to the next middleware function. Or if we get any error, then we are just returning the response to status 422. We are sending the JSON, which are, you can see the errors. So it is very simple for doing that. And now what we can do, we can export this as well. So we can export const user sign up validator. Then we can move on. First, we can just have the validation. So we can have the validate the user sign up validator. So first we want to validate the array of the user signups. You can see they have the type of the validation chains. Then after that, we want to move on. We want to access this sign up. So that would be very simple to read as well. You can see once we are moving on, once we are creating a sign up request, it means like first we are validating all of the credentials or of all of the data of the user. Then only we are proceeding to the sign up. So that's how it works. So you can see everything seems to be working perfectly fine for now. And here we don't be needing the next function. So we can remove that and everything seems to be working fine. So you can see now we have the user sign up, and now let's just test it out. So for that, we can again move on to the postman. We can again move on to the postman once again. So we can have the user slash we can have this sign up, and this would be a post request, and inside the JSON we'll be sending the JSON data. So the JSON data that we want to send is the name. So we can send the name, and that should be equals to, we can have the name, we can have the Nikhil as well. Name Nikhil Thadani. Then we can send the email as well. Then we can move on, we can send the password as well. So this is my password. So now we are sending the JSON data to this application. So once we click on the send, now you will see an amazing thing. So once you click on the send, you can see now we are seeing the invalid field, which is invalid value, path name, we have the body. But you can see we are sending the name, which is Nikhil Thadani, but still we are receiving the errors array, which is a type of the field. We have the field of the name, we have the invalid value. It means now what do we want to do? So we want to tell this whole application that we'll be just accepting the JSON data. So inside this Express.js application, inside the entry file, we want to specify that we'll be using the JSON data for incoming input output requests. So for that, what do we want to do? So again, we can use the middleware for that. So we can have the app.use. that should be equals to express.json. So this tells the application that only the JSON data is being used for the input output operations. And now let's just move on and let's just test it out. So if I just send the same credentials once again, if I click on the send, so let's see what happens. So you can see now we are seeing the message which is signed up. This spelling is incorrect. We have the signed up. You can see now we have the name, email, the password. You can see this is the hashed password. That's how we create the hashed password. So you can see the normal user cannot imagine that the 123456 is converted to this hashed password, the encrypted string. Then we are receiving the ID of the user as well. We have the user ID and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. Now, congratulations on completing the user sign up request. So it was a very complex thing, but now you know, and now you have a good hand inside the Express.js. I know because now you know that how to add the validations inside any application, and that's how it works inside the modern world applications. So now you have the message request of the user. So now you can move on into the data validator once again, and you can see you can add your own custom message as well inside this. Like if the name is not empty, you can add with message property, like with message, then you can provide the name is empty. So you can add with message as well. So here as well, you can have with message, we can have dot, we can have message. That should be, we can have the email is incorrect. So we can add the email is incorrect, and then you can again move on. We can add the password as well. So inside the password, we can again use with message. We can add this validation checks messages as well. And that's how the Express validator with the Express.js works. So if we just move on and if we just send the incorrect password, suppose, so if we send 123 only, if we just click on the send, so now you will see now the minimum length of the password should be between 5 to 25 characters. And there you can see the status is also 422, and that's how it's going to work. And you can see, suppose I send incorrect email, like if I just send the Anthadani over there, let's just click on the send. Now you can see email is incorrect, and that's how it's going to work. And if the name was empty, you can just check the name was empty. If we do not have anything inside the name, if we just click send, so let's see what happens. So now you can see the name is empty. So you can see these validations are required inside the model mode. So this will not affect directly to the database. So instead of checking through the database directly, we can just check it on our end. So that's how it works. The user sign up functionality is working perfectly fine. And now we want to move on to the user login part. And now we want to authenticate the user. So for that, now what do we want to do? So for the login, we can just move on. We can just copy paste this route and then we can register a new route that should be for login endpoint. So we can have domain slash user slash we can have the login. And after that, we need to create the validator once again. So that's a validate middleware. So we need to create the same for the login as well. So we can move on to this file inside the data validators. And here what we can do. So before the sign up, we can just move on. We can just copy paste the sign up validator and then we can paste that here. And the name should be, we can have the user login, we can have the validator. And now we have the user login validator. And inside the login, we only need to require the email and the password of the user. So what we can do, so we can remove the name and you can say inside the sign up and the login, the email and the password are same. So they are similar. So what we can do, so we can remove the email and the password validations directly from the sign up as well. And we can use them directly inside the sign up as well. So we can just use the spread operator to spread the elements of the user login. So first we can have the user login validator. Then we can just move on. We can provide the name as an additional parameter inside the sign up. So that's how it's going to work. Inside the login, we have the email and the password. And inside the sign up, we have the same fields of the login, but we have the additional parameter of the name. And now we can move on into the user router. So here we are using the sign up, but now instead it should be the login validator, the user login validator. And now let's move on into the handler function. So we can just create the brand new handler function. So we can just copy and paste the sign up. We can just use that for the login. So we can have the export, const, we can have the login. And now we can move on to the user router. So instead of the sign up, we can just use the login like that. So that's how it's going to work. So inside the login, now what do we need to do? So now we want to authenticate the user. So what is the authentication? So let's move on to a topic. So what is the authentication? Authentication is a process in which the user needs to verify their identity. So user needs to verify the identity with the authentication. And for this application, the user needs to provide the email and the password which it created during the registration process. So at the time of registration, the user has provided the email and the password. So now we want to verify the details of the user inside the authentication. And there is one additional layer of security inside our application is that the user will be provided a token after the authentication process. So if I give you an example of this authentication process, is suppose you have joined a company. So all your verification checks has been completed and now you have been provided an ID card. So now you have the ID card and now you can just sit on your bench. So you want to show your ID card to sit on a bench. So that's a token that you want to show for a step for a process to be completed. So now we'll be generating a token for the user as well. So what we will do, so we'll use the JWT, which is a JSON web token, which will be used to sign a token. It will encrypt some data into the token and then we'll be creating the validity of the token, like after how much time the token will be expired. So we'll be creating the token for the user, and after we'll be providing the token for the user, then we'll be sending the cookie as well for the user. So we'll be sending the cookie for the user for the authorization. And now what is authorization? Once again, authorization is a process is once the user authenticates, once the credentials are okay, once the email and the password is correct, then he's provided a token, and that's true. But now to access a resource, the user needs to show a token which was sent during the authentication. So now you can see, suppose the user has given an ID card and he wants to sit on a bench. So if the user wants to access the room of the admin or the server room, so if the user shows the ID card of a normal bench user, then he would not be allowed to do that because the user has entitled only to a resource that is available on a bench and not on a server or the admin room. So now the user needs to provide a token. So we can check the permissions of the user that if the user is entitled to a resource or not, so then only we'll allow something. So in this application now what we'll be having, so once the user completes the login and the sign up functionality, then during the login process, we will follow the authentication, we'll follow the email and the password, and then we can move on, we can provide the token to the user. We'll be providing the JWT token in a HTTP only cookie, and user will not be able to access the cookie as well because that's the HTTP only. So only it will be accessed by the request and the response directly from the server. So that would be the very simple process of the authorization, and that's the advanced security layer inside modern applications. So for the authentication, again, we'll be using the JWT, which is a JSON web token, and it is used to encrypt a payload, which is the data, into a signed token. So we'll be using the JWT to encrypt some data. So the data can be the ID of the user, the name and email of the user, and it would be encrypted into a string, into a signed token that has the permissions or authorities of the user. So in this application, we only be requiring the authentication state of the user, like if the user is logged in or not. If you are creating an application like Amazon, so suppose you are the admin, suppose you are the seller, or you are a simple customer. So you can have some of the permissions to authenticate and to authorize a user for a particular resource. And that's how modern applications work. So after the login, we'll be providing the JWT token. And again, we'll be using the HTTP only cookies. HTTP only cookies are a type of web cookie that comes with a special security attribute. So it comes with a special security that restricts the cookie from being accessed by the JavaScript. So HTTP only cookies are a normal cookies, but with an additional security layer that it cannot be accessed by the JavaScript. So suppose you have a form inside the JavaScript, and suppose an attacker tries to move on into your browser. So suppose if you add the alert or if you add the log inside the form as well, so that comes via the JavaScript. So you can access all of the elements directly via the JavaScript as well. So this is known as the XSS attack, which is cross-site scripting attack. So user injects a script into your web page and then they can steal your token and the cookies. So what we'll be doing to prevent that, we'll be using the HTTP only cookies that can only be accessed by the backend and not the front end. So this will prevent the XSS attacks for our application. So now you can see there's advanced security layers inside our application. So let's move on and let's just summarize all of that. So the authentication process inside this application is very simple. So user needs to log in. First, the user authenticates with providing the email and the password, and then the user will be having a cookies. So we'll be having the HTTP only signed cookies. So signed cookies are another type of security layer in which we will encrypt the content of the cookie. And then we'll be having the signed cookie, we'll be sending the JWT tokens inside the cookie. And then the final step would be now the user will be having the token. And now the user has the token. And now if the user wants to access the protected route or a protected resource, the user will be sending back the tokens as well. So that's how it works. So let's just implement all of that. And after we implement the authentication process, then we will show you that where the user wants to show the tokens and cookies. So it would be very simple. So now we have this login function, and here you can see now we do not need to provide the name, so we can remove the name directly from it. And now we can just remove everything from here directly. We can just remove everything till here. We can have the everything till here. And after that, instead of the existing user, we'll be having the user. So we'll be having the user directly down there. We can have the user. And after that, now what we are doing, so we are finding one user by its email. After that, now what we can do, so first if we can check if we do not have the user, like if the database, like if the user is not there inside the database, then we can again return a response. So we can have the response dot, we can have the status, and that should be equals to, so we can have the 401, which is unauthorized. So it should be, I think, 400, which is bad request. Then we can move on, we can send the JSON message as well. And inside the JSON message, we can send the message, we can have the user not, we can have the register. So we have the user not registered, and that would be very simple. And after that, now we want to authenticate the password of the user. Now we want to verify the password of the user. So as per the user, suppose the user sends you password 12345 6. So the users know only this password. So they don't know that the password is being encrypted or not. So what we need to do? So first we need to verify if this password is the actual password of the user. So that simple step is already covered inside the bcrypt library that we use for creating a hashed password. So we can move on. So we can declare a variable. We can have the const, we can have the is password, correct? And that should be equals to, we can again have the await, and that should be, we can use the bcrypt again. Dot, we can have the compare. So we can compare the password of the user, the data that we need to provide, that should be the password. So we can have the password and the encrypted string that we want to provide. And now we want to provide the encrypted string. So we can use the encrypted string directly from the user. We can have the user dot, we can have the password, and that's how it's going to work. So now we'll be having the boolean if his password is correct or not. So then we can just verify another thing, like if the is password correct is false, like if the password is not correct, then again we can move on, we can have the return, we can have the response dot status, that should be again, we can have the 401, then we can move on, so we can have the JSON, and inside that we can have the message over there, we can have the incorrect password and the incorrect password for that user. So after the password is correct, then we know that the user's credentials are okay. And now we want to generate a token. So for that, let's just create a new file inside this, inside the libs, that can be for the JWT. So we can have the JWT token generator. Dot, we can have the TS. We can have the JWT token generator. And inside this file, now we want to generate the JWT tokens for the user. And now we want to encrypt the ID, we can have the name, and we can have the email inside the user's token. That's how it's going to work. So inside this, now what we can do? Now inside this file, now what we can do? So we can move on, we can define a helper function in which we can create a token. So for that, first we can have the export, const, we can have the create token, and that should be equals to, so we can have the credentials as well that we want to store. So we can store the ID of the user. So we can have the ID, which is of the type of the string. Then we can have the email as well, so which is of the type of the string. And I think the name is not required, so we can skip the name part of the. And now we can provide another property which is expires in, so after how much time the token would be expired, so we can again accept a string for that, and that would be equals to a function. So now that's a function. And now we want to use the JWT for encrypting our token. So for that, we can have the const, we can have the token, and that should be equals to, we can import the JWT. So it would be very simple. So let's move on. So let's have the import JWT from, it should be imported from the JSON web token. After that, let's use the JWT. So we have the JWT dot, we can have this sign. So sign is used to encrypt a token. So inside this sign, now what do we want to do? So we want to store the ID of the user, and we want to store the email of the user inside this sign. And inside the second parameter of this sign, now we want to provide the secret key. So this secret key would be used to encrypt the details of the user. So we have already added the secret key of the JWT. So we have the your secret. So you can define a secret which is unimaginable. So you can use any secret like that. So you can use any secret. You can add the secret like this. So that can be your JWT secret, and this should not be shared to anyone. So that's a JWT secret. And after that, you can provide the JWT secret directly from the process dot we can have the environment dot we can have the JWT, then we can have the secret. So now we have the JWT secret for encrypting the string. And now what do we want to do? So inside the third parameter, that should be an object, and inside the object, now we want to provide the expires in property. So that's required that we want to provide. So we can have the expires in, and there you can see you want to provide like this. So you can have the 60 days as well, 2 days as well, 10 hours, 7 days. So what we will do, so we'll use this 7D for that. We can have the expires in, and then the expires in would be the same property that we are getting. So that is fully customizable. And after that, when the token would be created, then we'll be just returning that token. So now we'll be returning the token. So the create token would only return you the token. And after that, now what we can do, so we can move on into the user router inside the login function. And there you can see after the credentials are correct, then we can generate a token. So we can have the cons, we can have the token, and that should be equals to, we can have the create token. We can have the create token, and we'll be creating the token. We'll be providing the ID. We can have the user dot underscore ID, and we'll be having the toString because the ID is into object ID format. So first we want to convert that to the string. Then we can move on, we can put the email. So we can have the user dot we can have the email, and that is of type of the string. Then we can use the expires in, and that should be equals to, we can have the 7D for that. After 7 days, the user would be automatically locked out. So that would be the functionality. So you can see now we have generated the token. And now there's another thing that we want to do that we discuss, that now we want to send the cookie as well. So now we want to send the cookie to the user. Once the user logs in, now we want to send the cookie to the user that will be stored inside the HTTP only cookie. So that would be very, very simple. So now what we will do here, so creating the cookie is very, very simple inside this Node and the Express applications. Now what we can do, so first we need to move on to the entry level of your application. So inside the entry file, inside the index.ts, and now we want to register another middleware, which is a cookie parser. So we have already added that package inside the package.json. You can see here we have the cookie parser. So you can install that. Now you can move on into the index.ts. Now after the express.json, so we can have the app.use. So we can have the cookie parser. So you can just directly import the cookie parser, and that's how it's going to work. And after the cookie parser, now you want to provide the secret of the cookie as well, because now we'll be using the signed cookies. So now we want to provide the secret for signing a cookie. So we have already added that secret as well inside the environment file. You can see that's your cookie secret. And again, it could be your very difficult secret, which is unimaginable. So you can write any secret as well. So you can write that secret, and that's how it works. Now you have the secret over there. So we have the secret over there. Now we have the cookie secret. And now let's move on into the entry file once again. So inside the index.ts, now let's use the secret. So we can use the secret as we can have the process.environment. That should be equals to, we can have the cookie secret. We can have the cookie secret, and if you are not sure if the name is correct or not, you can just copy the name directly from there. You can paste that over here. So we have the process.environment.cookie secret, and that's how it's going to work. After that, you can see now everything is configured from our side, and now we only want to send the cookie. So for that, we can move on to the handlers once again. So it would be very simple. So now we can just move on. So first we can define the expiration date for the cookies. So now we should define the expiration date after how much time the cookie should be expired. So let's define the expiration time. So we can have the cons, we can have the expires. That should be equals to this. That should be equals to a new date, which is currently the date.now, plus we can have the 7 days into 24 hours into 60 minutes, and then we have the 60, and then we have the 1000. It will generate a cookie for 7 days. And after that, now what we can do, so now directly we can move on. So we can move on, and we can have this response dot, we can have the cookie. So we can have the response dot cookie, and then we can provide the name of the cookie. So the cookie name that we want to provide, it would be very simple. So we can have the JWT underscore, we can have the token. So we'll be encrypting the token inside the cookie. Then inside the second parameter, we want to provide the actual value of the cookie. So the value is the token. So we can just directly use the token. After that, inside the third parameter, it's an option subject that we want to provide. So we want to provide all of these parameters. So we want to provide some of these parameters. So first we can define the path of the cookie. So we can have the path, we can have the slash, we can have inside the entry point. And after that, we can move on, we can have the domain as well. So the domain that we want to provide, that should be, we can have the local host for now. So we can have the local host for now. And after the domain, let's just move on. So we can have the expires. So here we have the expires, and that should be equals to expires itself that we have. So we have the expires, which is a date. And after that, let's move on. So we can have the HTTP only, and that should be equals to the true, so that the cookie is HTTP only. Then we can have the signed as well. So now we have the signed cookie. So we can again move on and provide the signed, and that should be again, that should be true. And finally, now what we can do, so we can provide the same site, and that should be equals to, so we can have the none. So we can have the same site of the none, which is the default as well. And now let's move on. So now we have the cookie. So the path is the actual path of the cookie where it will be stored. We have the domain, we have the expires property, we have the same site. It means like if we want to access the same site, but we have a different server for that, so we'll be having the none for that. And after that, after we have the cookie, then everything seems to be working fine. And now I think before this, and I think before sending the cookie, let's just clear the cookie of the user as well. So we can have the response dot, we can have the clear cookie, and that should be equals to, we can have the JWT, that should be equals to the token. Like if the user login once again, so let's just remove the cookie and let's just add a new cookie down there, and everything should work perfectly fine. And after that, you can see the response dot status should be 200, which is okay. So that should be equals to the 200 for that. And after that, we'll be having the message. We can have the log in, and that should be enough for that. So we can have the logged in, and we don't need to provide the user's details. So we can have the logged in successfully, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. And now for testing this login functionality, now we don't need to use the postman, because now inside the postman, we won't be using the HTTP only cookies. So for that, we need to create a little bit of front end part. So inside the front end, let's just move on and let's just create the login screen so that we can test this application, that if the cookie is being stored or not. So let's just move on. And now to test the functionality, now we need a front end of this application. So for that, let's move on and let's just create a front end as well. So we can move on to the MERN AI chatbot, and there what we can do, so we can create another folder. So I think we can create a folder directly inside the MERN AI chatbot, which can be, we can create a folder of the front end like this. We can have the front end, and inside the front end, now what we can do, so we can move on, we can initialize a brand new React.js application. So for initializing a brand new React.js application, so we'll be using the Vite. So this time we'll be using the Vite, which is a front-end tooling. So it provides you the instant server start, the lightning fast hot module refresher. You can see they have the rich features as well, and it's very fast as compared to the Create React tab. So let's click on the get started, and from there we have here, you can see this is the command with the npm. So you can copy that command, which is npm create Vite @latest. So you can copy that, and then you can move on to the front end. So you can move on to the front end, you can add that command over there, the npm create Vite @latest. And after that, it will ask you for the name of your project as well. So you can have the AI slash, we can have the chatbot like that. So we have the AI chatbot, and after that, we need to select any framework. So which framework we'll be using? So we'll be using the React. So we can just select the React from this list. And after that, we'll be using the TypeScript. So let's just choose the TypeScript with that. And after that, you can see it will create a brand new React.js application. But now we want to install all of these modules. So let's move on into this. So let's move on to the AI chatbot. Let's just run the npm install to install all of the node modules which are required and which are registered inside the package.json. And after that, you can see there will be some modules, like you can see the ESLint modules, the types of the React DOM. So there are the basic modules which we require for creating this application. And after that, let's move on and let's just install a couple of dependencies that we'll be using inside this application. So the first library that we'll be using would be the Material UI for the design. So for the designing, we'll be using the Material UI. So we can move on to the MUI.com with the Material UI, and we can click on the Discover the Core Libraries. We can click on the Material UI, and from there we can move on. So you can see this is the installation command. So we can copy that, and then we can paste that over there. And Material UI is a React UI library component. It provides you the tons of components for using with the React. You can see there is a switch as well. You can see there are some tabs as well that you can use. So if you write the CSS for it directly from scratch, so it would take a lot of time. But with the Material UI, you can use a lot of components directly for free. So you can click on the get started. You can find all of the components that are required inside this application. You can see starting from the buttons, the text, you can see the select as well. You can see there are a lot of components that we'll be using, and it is based on the Google Material Design. And now let's move on. So the Material UI is installed, and the second library that we'll be using would be the React Router DOM. So for that, let's move on. Let's install that. So we can move on to the React. We can have the router. So you can say this is the official homepage of the React router, which is used for the routing purposes. And it is very fast as compared to the normal HTML routing. So it is very fast. So we can move on. We can install that as well. We can have the npm install. We can have the React. We can have the router. We can have -tom. So we need to install that. And after that, we'll be using the Axios as well, which is a HTTP request library. So we can install that as well. So we can have the npm install. We can have the Axios for now. So after that, now let's move on into the main file of our application. So you can move on to the main.tsx, which is the main file. And if you're creating a React tag with the create React app, then it would be the index. So we need to move on to the main. So from this file, we are rendering a root. And now let's just wrap this application with the routing. So for that, let's move on. Let's just use the browser router. So we can have the browser router and it should be imported from the React router DOM. So we need to wrap the whole application, the whole main entry point of this application with the router so that now we have the router provider at the top. So now we'll be having the router. And after that, let's move on to the app component. So there you can see this is the default setup. So let's move on and let's just run that. So we can have the npm, we can have the run, we can have the dev. After that, you can see the development server would be open in just 421 milliseconds. So that's really fast. Then you can move on. You can just click on the localhost 5173. You can control and click. And after that, you can say it is currently open there inside the 5173. So you can say this is the basic setup of the build. We can remove this full content directly from there. We can remove the count as well. We can remove the CSS, React logo, and the use state as well. So let's just keep it default and we can render the main over there. We can move on. We can just render the main tag. So we can have the main. We can have the hello like that. So here we can have the hello. And now you can see now we have the hello over there and it is working perfectly fine. And there you can see it is coming inside the center. So let's move on into the index.css. So there you can see there are some basic styles that we want to override. So we can remove them all. And then we can add another thing over there. We can have the HTML and we can have the body and we can provide the margin that should be equals to the 0. So the default margin inside the HTML is around 8 to 10 pixels. So we can remove that. So we can have the 0 pixels and there we can have the padding as well. So padding should also be the 0. And now you can see now we are seeing the hello over there without any margin or without any padding. So everything seems to be working perfectly fine. And now we want to design this application from complete scratch. So for that, now let's just move on and let's just add some routing over there. So inside this return statement, what we can do, so first we can just render the fragment and it should be imported from the React. So we can have the fragment and after the fragment, let's just move on. Let's just render the header as well. So I think we don't have the header as of now. So let's just add a basic header like this is header. So this is a header. And after that, let's just move on and let's just register all of these routes. So we need to import something from the React router DOM to register all of these routes. So we can have the import something that should be equals to, we can have the React router DOM and that should be equals to the routes. So we need to use the routes over there. So this is a container for all of the routes. And after that, to add each route over there inside this application, so we need to add the route. So this is a container and this is a route. So let's move on. So we can have the routes over there. That's a container over there. And after that, let's just render the route. The first route that we'll be having would be the home page. We can have the route, we can have the path, we can have the slash, which is nothing after the domain. Then we want to render an element as well. So we do not have any element as of now. So what we can do? So we can move on to the source. We can create a new folder. We can have the pages. So inside the pages, now we'll be rendering all of the pages that are required inside the routes. So the first page that we require is a home page. We can have the home page dot, we can have the tsx and we can add the default setup as well. We can add the default boilerplate code as well with the RFCE. So here we have the home page. After that, we'll be having the login and the sign up page as well. So we can have the login dot, we can have the tsx. So we have the login.tsx and here we'll be having the RFCE for the login. Then we can copy that. We can just create another file for the sign up. We can have the sign up dot, we can have the tsx. So here we'll be having this sign up like that. And here as well, we'll be having the sign up over there. And after that, we'll be having the chat page as well. So we're having the chat dot, we have the tsx. So here we would be having the chat as well. So we can have the RFCE. We can have the chat over there. We can remove the React import. So you can see these are the 4 pages which are currently required inside this application. So now let's move on into the app.tsx. So let's just register all of these pages. So we can have the element, and that should be equals to, we can have the home page. So for the slash route, we'll be using the home page, and let's copy that. Let's just move on. So here we have the path of, we can have the login, and for the login, we'll be using the login over there. Have the login like that, and then we'll be having the sign up as well. Have the path, we can have sign up. So we'll be having the sign up component over there. And now let's just move on. Let's just add the chat as well. So we can have the path that should be equals to, we can have the chat, and the element should be equals to, we can have the chat like that. And that's how it's gonna work. So everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So now let's just move on. So there you can see it is a header, and currently we are on the home page. And now let's just move on. Let's just add the chat as well. You can see now we enter the chat, and let's just move on to the login as well. So here we have the login. So everything seems to be working perfectly fine. And there we need to add one last route as well. So suppose if the user enters a route which is not registered inside this application. So suppose any XYZ route like this. So suppose the user enters that, you can see now we want to add the not found page as well. So for that, let's move on. Let's just create a not found page as well. So we can have the not, we can have the found, we can have the TSX. So that should be equals to the not found page. So we can have the RFCE, and inside there we can have the H1 over there. We can have the not, we can have the found. So here we have the not found page, and let's move on. Let's just add as well. So let's move on to the app component. So let's just copy that. And for adding a not found page, we add the star over there, which is the star, which means any route which is not registered over there. So that should be equals to, we can not, we can have the found. So you can see now we have the not found, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. And now let's just move on. And now let's just set some basic CSS as well, which we'll be using for this application. So we need to add the background color. So we can have the background for this application. That should be equals to, we can have the hash, we can have the 05101C. We have the background for this application, which is this. Save. So that would be the background. And we can add the color as well, which should be the white. So we can have the color, and that should be equals to the white. And after that, we need to add the font family as well. So for that, what we can do, so we can move on to the Google fonts, and we can select some fonts from there. So we can move on to the Google fonts. So let's just move on to the Google fonts like that, and let's just import any font from there. And you are free to choose any of the fonts that you want to choose. But here, what I'll be using is I'll be moving and choosing the Roboto slab. So and the Roboto, we can have the slab for the font. So I'll be using this font over there, and this looks great. And we'll be using this font, so we can copy that, and then we can select the styles. So starting from the 300 as well, we can add the 400, we can have the 500, 600, and we can have the 800 as well. So we can have these fonts, and we can add another font as well, which is, I think we can have the work sans. So we can move on. So we can have the work, we can have the sans. So we'll be using this font as well. So we can just copy that. We can select the 400 version of that. And now let's move on. Let's just click on the import. So we need to use the import statement of there. And what we can do, so we can just copy the import URL. It will import all of the fonts directly from the Google. So let's copy that, and let's just move on. So after that, inside the top of the CSS file, there should be the import statement for importing all of these fonts. And that's how it's gonna work. And inside the body as well, we can provide the font family. So for the by default font families, so we'll be using the font family. So that should be equals to, we can have the Roboto. So you can also copy that as well. So you can have the font family, which is a Roboto slab like this. You can have the font family like this. So if the CSS do not find the Roboto slab, then it will be using the serif font, which is by default available. And that's how it's gonna work. And now let's just create the header of this application as well. So let's move on to the header. So here we have the header of this. I think we didn't create the header component. So let's just move on, and let's just create the components. So we can have another folder in which we'll be using the components. So here we have the components, and we'll be using the header. We can have the header as well. We can have the header.tsx, and you can also create the sub modules as well. You can have the header, then you can have the index.tsx as well. The header, and then you have the index.tsx, and after that you can have the basic setup of the boilerplate code, and inside there you can just set the header. So you can have the header like this, we can have the header like that. So that would be the header like this, and now we can import the header directly into the main file, into the app.tsx. So that should be equals to the header itself. We can have the header like that. So that should be equals to the header. Now we have the index.tsx inside the header. And if you want to create some sub modules as well, then you can create that inside the header folder as well. So that's how the modern folder directories work. For creating the header, we'll be using the app bar from the material UI. So we'll be using the app bar. So we can move on to the MUI. So this is a app bar. You can see this is the API for that we'll be using. You can see the demo as well. So that's the app bar which is used for the header purposes. And after that, we'll be using the toolbar as well, which provides you a structure of adding the elements into it. So you can see this is a basic app bar with the material UI. You can add the logo of your application. I think you can move on. You can add the product as well, the pricing, the blocks. You can add the user menu as well. You can add these options, but we'll be using the basic. So let's move on. So after that, what we can do, so we can move on. We can add the app bar over there. App bar is there. And after that, what we can do, so we can have some styling as well. So first we can provide the SX, which is used for the custom CSS styling. We can provide the BG color, and that should be equal to the transparent. So that should be the transparent color. Then we can have the position as well. That should be equals to, we can have the static. It should be imported directly to the top. Then we can move on. So we can have the box shadow as well. So it's up to you if you want to define the shadow, but I won't be using the shadow. So here we have the shadow. That should be none. So that's how it's gonna work. And after that, we'll be using some toolbar as well. So we'll be having the toolbar inside there. So it should be imported from the MUI material like that. And now we have the toolbar, and inside the toolbar, now we can provide some of the styles. So we can have the SX component there directly. We can have the display, and that should be equals to, we can have the flex. And after that, now we need to design the logo of this application as well. So inside the header or inside the component, let's just create another folder. Let's just add the logo. So we can move on. We can move on to the components. We can create a new file. We can have the logo dash. We can have the index dot. We can have the tsx. So that is a logo for that. So we can add the logo as well. So for the logo, we'll be using an image from the OpenAI. So inside my GitHub public repository, you will find all of the images listed down there. So you can just add all of your images inside the public folder. So you will find these images inside the GitHub repository, which is an AI robot. So this is a robot. This is a nuclear item. So it's a type of AI image that we'll be using. And there we have a logo of the OpenAI. Then we'll be using this robot as well. So here we have 4 images that we'll be using. So for the logo, now we'll be designing a customized logo on our own. So what we can do, so inside this, we can provide the link. We can have the link as well. And it should be imported directly from the React router DOM. So this is a link which is used to navigate between the pages. So we can use that directly from the React router DOM. We can have the RRD, and then we can just import the link component directly from there. And inside the link, it's a required property, which is a to. So we need to provide the to prop, and to is the URL in which we want to navigate. So we can have the slash, which is a home page. After that, let's move on and let's just provide some basic designings once again. I think before the link again, we can provide a container. So we can have the box directly from the material UI. So box is a type of div that we'll be using. We can have the box as well. So it should be imported directly from the material UI. We can have the box, and again it should be imported from MUI material. So it should be equals to, we can have the box. And after that, now what we'll be doing, so here we have the link. So inside the box, we can provide some of the styles as well. So we can have some customized styles. We can have the display. That should be equals to, we can have the flex. We can have the margin from the right. And that should be, we can have the auto as well. Have the auto for the margin right. And after that, you can see everything seems to be fine, I think. And then we'll be having the align items as well. So we have the align items. And that should be, we can have inside the center. We can provide the gap as well. So that should be equals to the 1. So that's how it's gonna work. And after this link, now what we can do, so we can render an image. So we can have the image, we can have the source, that should be equal, so we can have the OpenAI dot, we have the PNG. So it's a PNG image. And after that, what we'll be using, so we need to define the alt. So that should be equals to OpenAI, and credit goes to the OpenAI as well. And now let's move on. We can define the width as well. That should be equals to, we have the 30 pixels would be enough for the width. We have the 30 pixels, and we can have the height as well. Again, that should be equals to, we can have the 30 pixels for the height. And then let's move on. We can have this style as well. And have this style. I think we can have the colors. So that should, I think the color won't work for the image. So we need to define a customized CSS style for the style. I think that the style, we can use the filter. If we can use the filter, yes, we can use the filter. So that should be equals to, can provide any filter. Like I think we can move on. We can provide some color to the image directly from the class names. We can have the class name over there. We can have the image color. So we can have the image color class name. So for that, if we just move on to the application and if we just render the logo first, so we can just render the logo. The logo is not there. I think it is the index, so we can have the logo like this. Logo, and it should be imported as well, and it should be exported as well, like the logo. Let's just use the logo over there. We can have the logo like this, and let's just test it out that how it looks. So if we move on to the application, you can see now we have the black image of the OpenAI. So we need to fix that. So what we can do, so we have the logo, and inside the logo we can provide some styles as well of the color. So inside the index.css, so we can have dot image color, so we can use the filter, so we can directly use the filter, and that should be equals to, we can have the invert, which is invert, and that should be equals to the 100%. So let's see. So now you can see now we have the OpenAI and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So now we have the filtered image as well. And after that, now let's just move on. So there you can see. So now we can render some text as well. And there after this link, we can have some typography, and it should be imported again directly from the material UI. I think the auto completion is not working. We can import manually with the typography over there, and we have the typography over there. Then we can provide some styles once again. So we can have the SX, that should be, we can have the margin from the right, and that should be, we can have the auto. Font weight we can define weight, and that should be, we can have the 800. And now let's just move on, and we can have the text shadow as well. So we can have the text shadow 2 pixels of horizontally, 2 pixels vertically, the blur of 20 pixels. We can have, I think, for the color of the shadow, we can have hash, we can have the 000, which is a black color, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. And after that, for the first letter or for the first word inside the header, like the header should be the MERN GPT. So for the first word of the MERN, we'll be using some customized style. So now let's move on. Let's just add the span tag. We can add the style like that, and that should be, we can have the font size, and that should be equals to, we can have the 30 pixels. And after that, let's move on. Let's just add the MERN like that. After that, we'll be having the GPT as well. So after the span, we'll be using the GPT like that. So we can remove the typography from the link, and then we can add that outside of the link tag. And that's how it's gonna work. So you can see now we have the MERN GPT, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So there's one thing which we need to note, like you can see the font family is not working for the material UI components like the typography. So for that, what we can do, either we can provide the font family directly from here. So we can have the font family, which can be the Roboto, or you can directly move on to the main, and you can define a customized theme over there. And the cons, we can have the theme of the material UI, and that should be equals to, we can have the create theme. So you can import something which is create theme directly from the material UI. You can have the import something from, can have at the rate UI material, that should be equals to, we can have the create theme, and you need to import the theme provider as well, which is a provider for the theme. After that, inside the create theme, you can move on, you can add an object, you can provide the theme for the typography. So you can select the typography directly from there, and from the typography you can move on, you can have the font family. So that should be equals to, you can have the Roboto slab, and after that, let's move on, let's just add the comma, and let's just add the serif as well. So that's how it works. And after that, after the browser router, then we can add the theme provider as well. We have the theme provider. Inside the theme provider, we can move on, we can just wrap the app component with the theme provider. We can provide the theme that should be equals to the theme that we have just created. So if we save, and now if we move on, so now we have the MERN GPT. I think now we have the Roboto slab for the designing, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine now. And now we want to add the navigation buttons inside this application. So we want to add the navigation buttons, but according to two scenarios. The first scenario would be if the user is logged in. So then we'll be showing the buttons for the logout and going to chat window. And if the user is not logged in, then we'll be showing the buttons for the login and the sign up, so that the user can move on to that page. So that would be very simple. But for that, to handle that, we need the overall state inside this application, so that even in the children components, we can just get the state if the user is logged in or not. So we can do that with the Redux. So we can add the Redux inside this application. We can add the Redux store, and it provides you the state for overall application. It adds the provider into your main file, and you can use the Redux in the overall application inside any of the component. You can get the state of the login or not instead of the Redux, but here we'll be using the context API of the React. So we can use the context API. We'll be designing like our own Redux for that, so that we can just use some of the variables directly from the top level. So let's move on. So here you can see here we have the main.tsx. So you can see as the browser router works, it adds the routing functionality to all of its children's. As the theme provider also works, so we'll be adding the authentication provider as well, in which we can get the authentication state directly into the app component. And inside any children's of the app component, we can just get the state of that authentication. And inside the authentication state, we won't only be storing the is logged in property, like if the user is just only logged in, so we'll be having the logout function as well, the login function as well, and we'll be using the is logged in property, which mentions that if the user is logged in or not, and we'll be storing the user object as well. So the user object with the name and the email. So that would be very simple for us for designing the context API. So for that, let's move on. So inside this source, now what do we need to do? So we can create a new folder. We can add the context like that. So that should be equal to the context. And after that, now what do we want to do? So we can move on, and here we can just provide a new file. We can have the auth context like that. So we have the auth context dot, we have the tsx, we have the auth context dot tsx, and after that, now we need to define the context inside the React. So if you don't know about the creating the context, so first we create a context, then we add the providers so that the children can consume that provider. So it is very simple. So first we need to define the name of the context. So we can have the const, we can have the auth context, but that should be equals to, we have the create context. So we need to import something from the React, which is a create context, and then we need to provide a default value for that. So we can have the default value. So that can be, we can provide, I think for the default value, we can skip that for now, but instead we can provide the type for the context. So we can add the types inside the context so that we can get all of these variables predefined here. So let's move on. So we can have the type. So that should be, we can have the user auth, and that should be equals to, can have the object, and we can provide the type. The first would be the user property. So for the user, we'll be having the customized user property. So again, we can have the type of, we can have the user. So that should be, we can have the name. So that should be inside the string format. Then we'll be having the email. And again, that should be of the string format. This string like that. And after that, we can provide the type of the user to the user type itself. So we have the user type itself for the user. And after that, we'll be having the is logged in property. So we have the is logged in property, and that should be of the Boolean. So we have the Boolean property so that we can just get if the user is logged in or not. Then what we can do, then we can move on. We can define the function of the login. So we have the function of the login, and inside this function, we'll be having two parameters. So once we call this login function, we'll be having two parameters. First would be the email that is provided by the user. Then we'll be having the password provided by the user. So that should be of type of, again, inside the string. Then we can just move on, and it returns a promise. So we can have the promise as well. We can use the promise, and that should be of the void. So we won't be returning anything inside the promise. So that should be of the void. And after that, now what we can do? So we can have the logout function as well. We can move on. I think my control is here. We can have the logout, and that should be equals to, again, a function in which we won't be requiring anything, but here it will also be a promise. So we want to make a request as well to the backend that if that the user is logged out, and then just remove the cookies from the user's browser. And the promise, again, that should be of the void. So we have the type of the user auth. Then we can define the type as well. So we can move on. So we can have the user auth like that. User auth, initial value inside the user auth would be, we can provide an object. We can provide the is logged in. That should be equals to, we can be false. Then we can move on. So I think what we can do, so we can provide the null property for the initial value. So we can have the null for that, and that's how it's going to work. Then we can have the null as well here. So we can move on. So inside the user auth, so it can be the user auth or it can be the null. Initial value would be the null after that. And now we have created a auth context. And now we want to create a provider for that. That we can click const and the auth provider. So we have the auth provider, and it's a component which will get the children. It's a component which gets the children inside there. So that's a normal React component. And inside there, now what we can do? So we'll be having the children like that. We can define the type as well. We can define the type like this. So we have the children like that, and that should be the type of, we can have the children node like that. So we can have the children. That should be equals to, we can have the React node like that. So we have the React node like that, and that's how it's gonna work. So now that's a children node of the React. And now what do we want to do? So here we can run a use effect code. So what we can do, so we can run a use effect, and inside that it would be empty for now. So it should be empty for now. But inside this use effect, we need to fetch something from the backend. So once we move on to the auth provider, we can just fetch the details like if the cookie is valid or not. Fetch, like we can add the comment as well, like fetch if the cookie is valid or not, and set the user to, we can have the logged in or not. User login to true. So that would be the thing inside the use effect. So what we will do, so we'll make a request inside the backend and we'll fetch, like we will just make a HTTP request to the backend, and then we'll fetch if the cookie is valid, then the user would be logged in, or the user would not be logged in. So that's how we'll be doing that. And after that, now what do we want to do? So you can see now, I think we can move on and we can define some states as well. So before that, we can move on, we can define some states. So we can have the user. So we can have the use state for that. So here we have the use state. We can define the snippet as well. So now what we'll be doing inside the snippet. So we'll be having the user and we'll be having the set user, and initial value would be, we can have the null. Have the initial value that should be of the null, and that should be the set user. And after that, now what do we want to do? So we can move on. We can provide the is logged in property or not. Is logged in, and then we'll be having the set is logged in. So we can just provide the set is logged in, and by default value should be equals to, we have the false like that. So by default value should be false, and we need to define the type as well. So that should be of the user, or it should be the null for the initial value. So we have the type for this, and inside this we'll be having the type for the boolean. So that's how we are gonna work. And after that, after this use effect, now what we'll be doing, so we'll be just sharing the details like the user is not logged in. So as of now, we can just move on. We can provide the details like set is logged in, that should be equals to false, and we'll be having something like set user. So that should be equals to the null for now. So this use effect will handle all of that. And now we'll be defining the login function as well. So we'll be having the login function. So we can have the const, we can make space, so we can have the const, we can have the login, and that should be equals to asynchronous function. So the asynchronous arrow function will be having the email of type of this string, we'll be having the password of type of again this string. So we have the email and the type of the string. So that's a normal login function for now. And we'll be defining the login function after we define the login screen. And after that, now what do we want to do? So we can define the logout function as well. Logout. So that should be a function again. So we won't be requiring any data for now. So that is for the logout. And after that, now what we'll be doing? Now we'll be just exporting all of these functions and some variables which are required. So we can do that inside the value object, because we can have the value, and that should be equals to an object which contains the properties like user, which contains the user, or which contains the login function, which contains the logout function as well. So logout, and which contains the is logged in as well. So the value contains these properties, the user, the login, logout, and the is logged in. And after that, what we want to return from this context provider, so we can just return this. So we can have the return, we can have the auth context over there, we have the auth context, or we can have the provider. So that's a provider over there. And then inside this, we need to render the children. So the children would be all of the React application components for that. And then we need to provide the provider value as well. So what provider it will be having. So we can have the value, and that should be equal to the value that we have just created. So that's how it's gonna work. And here we have a type error as well. So let's see the type error, like user null is not assignable to null. I think what we can do, so we can move on to the user property. We can define the null as well. So we have the user slash null. Everything seems to be working perfectly fine for now. And you can see everything is fine. And now we have the auth provider as well. And now let's just export the last thing, which is using this context. So we can do it inside any component as well. So, but if we do it directly from here, it would be useful for all of these components. So we can have the export, we can have the const, we can have any name, like we can have the use auth like this, and that should be equals to a function again. That's a function in which now what we'll be doing. So now we want to just return. So we can just return use context. So we can import the context. So we can use the context that we have just created. So we have created a context of the use context. So now we'll be returning the use context, and there we need to render the context that we have just created. So we have the auth context like that. And that's how it's gonna work. And after that, we can just export this auth provider as well, so that we can just wrap the children's into it. So that's all for the authentication context inside this application. And now let's move on. So we can move on to the main file. So here we have the main, and after the router or before even the router, we can just render the auth provider. So we can have the auth provider like that. So here we have the auth provider, and then we need to render all of these children's inside there. And that's how it's gonna work. So you can see everything seems to be working fine for now. And after that, you can see now we can move on, and then we can just render the buttons according to it. Like suppose if we move on to inside the pages, inside something like login, or what we can do, so we can move on to the header directly. So we can move on to the components header, and inside this now, if we want to use the context, so we can have the cons, we can have something. So that should be equal. So we can have the use auth. So we can use the use auth directly from there, and then we can just import something as well. Like we can have the auth data, and there we can just store the auth data as well, and then we can just log the auth data. So we can have the auth data dot, we have the properties as well, like it's logged in, the logout, we have the logout function, the user property as well. So let's log in the is logged in property. So let's log the is logged in property. So we can move on to the inspect over there, we can move on to the console. You can see now we have the false for the is logged in. And suppose if we move on, if we just change the value directly from here, if we change the value from the provider like this, if that's true, then we'll be seeing the true for the is logged in property. So you can see now we have the true, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So it is set it up to false once again because we are running the use effect code. Everything seems to be working perfectly fine. And now let's just get back to the header component. So now we need to render the buttons inside there. So we can move on to the header, and the header took us a lot of time. So just close that for now. And now let's move on. So here you can see now we want to render the links from the navigation bar. So how can we do that? So first remove this log. Then what we can do? So we can just create a link component after this logo. After this logo, then we can create a link component, or what we can do, so we can create a customized link component. And because we can have the link, we can have the custom, so we can have the navigation link, and that should be equals to what we can do. So we can move on, and that should be equals to a function in which we'll be getting some props as well. So we'll be creating a custom component for that. We'll be having the props, like we'll be having the two, and we'll be having the props of, I think we can move on, we can have something like color as well. So we can have the bg color for that. So we can have the bg. So these two properties will be of the string. And now what we'll be doing, so we'll be having the two, and that should be of the string bg, and that should be of the string to define the types for that. And now what do we want to do? So here we'll be just returning the link. So we can just move on, and we can return the link from the React Router DOM. We can move on. We can import something from the React Router DOM. We'll be importing the link. So this is used to navigate between multiple pages. So that's a link for that. And inside this link, we'll be having the two prop. So that should be equals to 2 itself. And after that, inside this link, I think we need the text as well for that. So the text. So after this bg, we'll be having the text as well. So we'll be having the text of type, and again have the text of type of again the string. So we have the text for that. And after that, now what we'll be doing, so we'll be having the link component over there. We can have the two, and then we can have the text as well. Here we have the text, and after that we need to provide some styles for that. So we need to provide some styles. So we can provide the class name for the link. We can have the class name for that. We'll be providing some css styles for that. So let's move on. So we can have the nav link for the styles. So we have the nav link for that. Now let's just define the styles for this. So we can move on to the index.css. You can also create a customized CSS as well, and that's up to you. We have dot, we have the nav link, and there we have the styles. We have the color, and that should be, we can have the black for that for now. We can have the font weight for now. We can have the font weight. That should be, we can have the 500 for that. We can move on. We can have the text transform, and that should be, we can have the uppercase. Then we can move on. We can provide the margin from the left, and that should be somewhere around, we can give the 10 pixels for now. We can have the margin from the right as well. That should be 10 pixels. We can move on. We can have the margin right, and that should be of the 10 pixels. That's how it's going to work. And after that, we'll be having the padding as well. So we can define the padding, like for the top and bottom, the 8 pixels and 20 pixels from the left and right. Then we can move on. We can provide the border radius, and that should be somewhere around 10 pixels would be enough. And then we can move on. We can have the text decoration, that should be none to remove the underline. Then we can have the font family as well. We have the font family, and the font family should be same like we have the Roboto Slab, so we can use that. And I think it would be by default applied as well, so we can still use that over there. It's no problem. Then we have the letter spacing as well, so that should be 1 pixels for now. So we have the nav link for that, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. And now let's move on. Let's just use that over there. So have the class name. Then we can override some styles as well inside the style. Like we can have the background. So that should be equals to, we can have the background itself. Like we can have the BG over there. It would be the string. So that's enough for now. So after this logo, then we can just use the nav link over there. We have the navigation over there. And we can provide some of these styles. Like we can have the background. So for this, what we can do? So for the background, for the login, so we can have the login, we can have the hash, we can have the 00FFFC. That is for the background for the login. And after that, we can provide the 2 as well. So we can have the 2, that should be, we can have slash login. Then we can have the text as well. So that should be, we can have the login for now. And after that, we'll be using for the sign up as well. We can move on. So we can have the BG. For sign up, we'll be having a different background color. So we have 51538F. So we have this color for that. And after that, we'll be having, I think, the 2. That should be equals to, we can sign up for now. We have this sign up, and it should also be the sign up for now. And everything should work perfectly fine. So now you can see, now we have the login button over there. Now we have the sign up as well, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. I think we can just change the color as well for this. And let's move on to the index.css. Let's just use this 600 font. Let's see how it looks. So login in the sign up. We can also change the color as well. So we can, I think we can move on. So we can just apply some color as well. So we can remove the color from here. We can create it fully customized. So text color. That should be again inside the string format. Text color. That should be inside the string. So now we have the customized component. Then we can have the color as well. That should be the text color for now. The text color. And everything should work perfectly fine. So we have the navigation link. Then we can have the text color. That should be, we can have the black for now. Black for this. And then we can move on. So we can have the text color for this. And that should be have the white for now. That's how it's gonna work. So now we have the login and the sign up, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So now this is the scenario for the user. If the user is not logged in, now we need to define if the user is logged in. So for that, now what we can do over there, so we can add a condition over there. The condition could be very simple. So after the logo, we can add a conditional statement over there. We can have if the auth data, or we have is logged in, then what we'll be doing, then we'll be using a box over there, or we can add the empty tag over there. And inside the empty tag, we'll be having these things items. For that, we'll be having the empty tag over there. We'll be having these two link items. If the user is not logged in, so now we are seeing the login. And if the user is logged in, then what we can do, so we can copy that. We can just move on. We can paste that over there. We can just move on. So the text should be, I think the 2 should be of, we can have this slash. I think the 2 should be, we can have the chat over there. We have the chat. The text should be, we can have the go chat. We can have the text color of the black. So for the sign up, now what we'll be having, so we can remove the sign up. Text should be, we can have the logout, and the color should be white, and that would be very simple. So now if we move on to the authentication context inside the auth context, so let's move on. Let's just set the initial value. That should be, I think now it's true. So in the initial value, what we can do, so we can remove the use effect for now. We can comment out the use effect. So now let's see, now we have the go to chat, and then we have the logout, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine.